One day, out of nowhere, a giant crack appeared. A blue aura emerged from it and rapidly spread throughout the world. People called her Mana, and a minority that is particularly mana-sensitive has also emerged. A minority that has gained a special ability from this influence. Such people have come to be called awakened. After that night, the storm of mana suddenly ended. But the mysterious crack in the sky remained. And, after a while, as people became accustomed to the existence of the awakened ones, storms of mana went all over the world. However, this time, it wasn't a normal crack that just appeared in space. It turned out to be something more horrible, a portal-like substance. For the first few hours, people couldn't understand what could have caused this phenomenon, until the passage between dimensions cracked. These portals came to be called gates. Unseen monsters have broken into our world, instantly sowing panic among living beings. The governments of the countries could do nothing against these creatures, and so the peaceful citizens had no choice but to flee. From that day on, everything changed beyond recognition. The world everyone knew had gone through a cataclysm, and now getting things back to normal is going to be quite a challenge. The human race has only one choice left: fight to gain the right to live and prevent the destruction of the entire species. This guy thought everything would change when he became awakened. He didn't want to work hard anymore. Not that the young man wanted to be worshipped by everyone. He did not desire power over anyone, nor did he crave to be feared. What the guy wanted most wasn't something beyond fantasy. The only thing he wanted was to not be beaten or ripped off. No matter what happened, however, he was unwilling to use violence. This young man just wished he had someone he could call a friend. But even that was probably too much of a pipe dream. The boy also turned out to be extremely sensitive to mana, and accordingly, he was also dubbed the Awakened One. Unfortunately, this guy's abilities were incredibly weak. Despite being an awakened one, the young man's strength manages to be inferior to even a normal human. One of the weakest among the special people gifted with mana management skills. A lowlife, unable to fight alone or help his squad mates in any way. Useless D rank. This guy was ridiculed every time he introduced himself as a hunter. The boy knew that one day he would die so ignominiously. He always realized that. However, the young man wasn't going to put up with it so easily. He didn't want to die anyway. The guy doesn't want to die so helpless. If he just died now, there would simply be no point in his existence before that. Perhaps if the boy gets stronger, things will change. No longer would he have to hide behind the backs of his comrades and put them in harm's way to save his life. There would no longer be any need to shake with fear at the sight of even the weakest enemy. If he can become the strongest even though he is a sapert, then maybe his life will turn out completely differently. This is the voice of the system. You have opened the stream. The mission is complete. You have met all the conditions to become a player. Welcome, player, Shin. Turning behind a tree, the guy in white sneakers continued running through the woods without losing speed. Having already run several hundred meters without stopping, the young man is in a big hurry to get somewhere. Trying to control his breathing, Shin can't understand how he could be late on such an important day. There he is, said the girl to her partner, looking at the rapidly approaching panting boy. A man sitting on a stump with a shield behind him grudgingly remarked that newcomers were almost always late. However, a woman standing nearby reminded her comrade that he was no better for his years. This man's name is Lim Duwan, and he is a C-rank hunter. Class, Defender. He is the main tank of the Duwan Guild. The girl standing next to her is also a C-rank hunter. Kim Chiman is a fighter. She is one of the main melee fighters of the Duwan Guild. Awkwardly scratching the back of his head, the young man who ran up to them apologizes for being late. Shin Chanson, D-rank hunter. Class, Creator, Duwan Guild support. A creator who specializes in creating weapons. Standing up from the stump, Lim asked the boy not to be frightened, explaining that he was just kidding. The young man wasn't that much late. After patting Jungzeon on the back, the girl said that it was time for them to go. Hyun and Toyun were already waiting for them. After they said that, the guy went down. It's really bad. 3 months had passed since he joined the guild. This was his first dungeon, and he was late. Either way, Chauncey needs to get his act together. This is his first dungeon he's going to as a dungeon supporter. You need to prove your usefulness! Once inside, the masked man decided to ask the guy about something. Mun Toyun of the assassin class and part-time head of the Duwan Guild asked the young man if this was his first raid. Lowering his gaze, Chauncey confirmed it and explained that this was his first time going as a supporter. He then added that he had helped out in dungeons a couple times before. In that case, Toyun decides to explain something. Supports, unlike fighters, can't fight, so you have to pay attention to where you are. If you get too close, there's a chance of getting into a fight. And if you stand too far away, your allies won't be able to protect you. The point is to stay at an optimal distance. And since Chonson is the creator, he needs to keep his distance and create daggers when the guild leader gives the signal. Easy, isn't it? Toyin said contentedly, glancing at the agitated boy. The young man then remarked that it was really quite easy. But did he not need to create any other weapons besides blades? In turn, the assassin confirmed this, explaining that of the entire squad, he was the only one who needed additional weapons. The man added that this is a simple dungeon. Since it's the first one for Jongseon, the guild leader asks him not to overdo it. While they were talking to each other, C-rank mage Lee Hyun asked his teammates to wait for a while. He sensed an incredible amount of mana ahead. There's most likely a monster nearby. All right, everyone prepare for battle. Hold formation, Moon Toyon shouted confidently. After that, he turned to the mage and asked him to clarify the number of opponents. Hyun told him that there were 3 small auras and 1 large aura in front. This aura was big enough for the boss. Without saying it out loud, the assassin's implication was rather odd. Usually the boss didn't show up here. He told his companions that he would have to take on the boss and asked his partners to handle the rest. Turning to Chonseong, the masked man asked how long it would take to create the dagger if one hurried. The boy replied that it would take about 20 seconds if one tried hard enough. But in that case, the dagger wouldn't even last a minute. Good, then start creating. I'll be done with him in 40 seconds, Mun Toyon said, pulling the mask down from his face. These creatures are called crystal lizards. Threat level D. A monster that grows on mana stones in dungeons. Appearance and abilities change depending on the mana stone consumed. As Chimin kneaded his fists, the shield partner standing next to him muttered out that he was getting started. In the same instant, a terrifying purple aura enveloped his entire body. With a single step, Lim broke through the stone floor beneath him. After that, he raised his shield high above his head with a speedy swing. In the next second, the man swung his shield to the ground, scattering the enemies in different directions with the shockwave. Meanwhile, without a moment's hesitation, Chiming hopped down from her seat and rushed towards her opponents. While in the air, the girl slid her arm behind her back, preparing to deliver her strongest blow. With a lightning-fast attack, she immediately sealed the crystal lizard into the ground, breaking the creature's jaw. After finally finishing off the enemy, Chiming pushed off the corpse with her hand and did a somersault in the air. The moment she landed, the monster behind her fell dead to the ground. However, when she turned around, the girl noticed that the 2 crystal lizards had already managed to recover from Lim's stunning attack. Realizing that these creatures were recovering faster than expected, Chiming shouted, alerting her partners that 2 monsters were running at them. Putting his shield in front of him, covering Hyun, Lim asked his partner where his magic was. Casting a spell, the mage explained that everything was almost ready. Extending his hand forward, Hyun shouted furiously, after which a bright flame materialized from his palm. In the next second, dozens of fireballs flew around his partner's shield and headed towards his opponents. In a moment, after several blinding explosions, most of the dungeon became filled with red flames, burning everything in its path. When the enemies were finished, Lim suggested that his partner go and help the others. Shin Chongsun, who was observing this, noticed the striking order of the comrades' attack. Is this really how a guild fights? When Toyon asked the guy what about the weapons, he replied that everything was almost ready. That's right. Now is not the time to be distracted. We need to focus. Shin Jongseong uses the F-rank creator ability to craft weapons. This is a basic creator skill that uses the user's mana to create an item. The item's longevity and quality depends on the user's mana. After a while, the guy finally finished making the weapon. After that, he immediately threw a dagger at Toyon. In turn, the guild leader, without slowing down, easily caught the blade in his hand while running. At the same instant, the dagger in his palm was filled with dark matter. This is the famous A-rank shadow weapon. This skill uses the user's weapon to transform it into a shadow weapon. The shadow weapon increases quality and mana depending on the user's mana. It disappears after a while. Running up to his opponent, the assassin ducked and swung his blade. In the same second, Toyon covered several meters in one dash and chopped off the crystal lizard's head, leaving a trail of dark aura behind him. When the monster's severed head fell to the ground, the man was already walking towards his partners without turning around. With a glance in his hand, the guild leader noticed that the blade had begun to vaporize. Walking up to his teammates, a satisfied Lim asked them if anyone was hurt. Meanwhile, looking at his comrades, Chonson realizes they're a lot tougher than he imagined. Everyone is great, yet their teamwork is beyond praise. They can become the best at what they do when they achieve more. Compared to them, Chonson could do absolutely nothing. The guy only managed to create one dagger. He was no help, and he got distracted. The annoyed young man is convinced he doesn't deserve to be with them. Nice work. You're not hurt? Toyon suddenly said as he approached him, pulling his mask down from his face. Laughing disappointedly, Chonson said that he was fine thanks to his comrades. The guy then remarked that he wasn't so helpful in turn. What are you talking about? Thanks to your skill, I've saved so much money. The guild leader replied to him in disagreement. As the young man could see, the assassin skill absorbs weapons. Toyon couldn't afford it even if he bought the cheapest ones. Placing a hand on Chanseong's shoulder, the man added that this was why he needed a creator. Moreover, Toyun seemed to need a mana-filled weapon to activate his skill. Anyway, great job for a first dungeon. I'll be looking forward to the next one. Don't leave us, okay? Muttered the guild leader, encouraging the boy with that. Uplifted by such words, Chonson thanked the man, promising that he would try harder. Walking up to Toyun, Lim suggested that he gather all the loot and get out of here. But at that moment, the ground beneath their feet shook with tremendous amplitude. Looking around frightened, the squad tries to figure out what's going on. Is it an earthquake? The cave can't just collapse because they killed the boss, right? As the comrades panic trying to figure out what happened, a terrified Chonson pointed a finger somewhere. Not far from them, a crystal wall collapsed. When the earthquake was over, a puzzled Hyun decided to check what was behind the fallen wall using magic. Turning around, he informed his teammates that some sort of path seemed to have opened up in the dungeon. Moreover, it was connected to something. Looking at him interestedly, Toyun wondered where such a low-level dungeon had gotten a secret path from. At this moment, the admiring Lim remarked that it couldn't be anything other than a passageway to a secret treasure. They should definitely go there and check it out. Running up to him, Chiming, who was equally enthusiastic, agreed with her partner. However, with an uncertain look at them, Hyun said to wait a bit. They can't just go there. But when the guild leader asked him if there was anything dangerous ahead, the mage replied that he couldn't sense anything. Good. I don't think it's going to collapse here. We'll be quick, Toyun said confidently, realizing that there was no danger to this path. The enthusiastic teammates immediately cheered him on. Exhaling, Hyun realized that he had no choice, and so he decides to go with his comrades. Turning to Chanseong, the guild leader beckoned him along and advised him to keep up. Immediately after his words, a group of adventurers went to explore the secret path that had opened up before them. And it's only been a few minutes since then. The ferocious crystal monster opened its huge maw and roared deafeningly. In a panic, Shin Jungseong, running away from him, can't understand how this could have happened. God damn it, everyone's dead! Everyone but him! A D-rank dungeon shouldn't have monsters like this. The guy had never heard of a creature that magic didn't recognize. Trying to keep himself alive by fleeing, the young man looked around to see where the enemy was. He followed right behind him. The second the guy realized it, the huge crystal monster swung its fist and immediately slammed into him, throwing Chonson back a few dozen meters. As he landed on the ground, the boy's back hit the ground and blood spurted from his mouth due to his damaged lungs. With trembling hands resting on the floor, the guy realizes he urgently needs to get up. However, while he was trying to get to his feet, an opponent had already run up to him from behind. Sitting down on his knees, the gasping young man immediately produced a dagger. He can't die like this! Although this blade was created in a couple of seconds, the time it exists is enough to hit the target. This is his last chance! Screaming in despair, Chanseong threw his dagger at his opponent with all his might. But as expected, this blade was completely useless. When the knife hit the monster's body, it simply bounced off and crashed into the wall of the cave. Ignoring this, the creature swung its fist again, preparing to deliver a crushing blow to the kid. A devastating explosion erupted a moment later, raising a column of shrapnel and smoke. After one blow from the monster, the floor shattered into pieces, and Chonson, who was within the radius of the collapse, fell down. After flying some distance downward, the guy fell into the water, and because of finally exhausted strength began to sink. So that's what it's like. A D-ranked main deck support who can't even use basic effects like heal. He finally found the guild that needed him, but they ended up leaving him. How cruel. Shin Jungseong is sure someone else would have done more good. If he hadn't become awakened, things would have turned out differently. In any case, it's just his pipe dream. This is the voice of the system. You've opened stream. The mission is complete. You have met all the conditions to become a player. Welcome, player, Shin. Suddenly, a system window appears in front of the dying guy's face. It informs the young man that a new reward is available to him and asks if he wants to look into it. Staring doomedly at the mysterious window, Chonson can't figure out what's going on. A player? What kind of reward? While the guy was thinking, the oxygen in his lungs ran out, and he immediately tried to inhale some air. The boy doesn't know what's going on, but it doesn't matter anymore. Whatever, he thought, reaching out to the system window. Though as imaginary as possible, it was his last hope. He touched the yes button with his last strength. Staring blankly at the system window, the young man continued helplessly submerged. But at that moment, a two-handed sword filled with mana materialized under his feet. Creating blades in front of him, the Chonson, shrouded in a terrifying aura, began to climb them from the bottom as if they were stairs. Once again, facing the crystal monster, the guy clenched his fists coldly with all his might. Gunsmith Shin, you get memories of your previous life. Award distribution is over. When the system stopped alerting, the young man raised his head and glared grimly at his opponent. In the same second, he created dozens of sharp blades and hurled them at the enemy. The swords filled with pure mana immediately stabbed into the crystal monster, piercing through it several times. Unable to stay on its feet, the creature fell to the ground with a loud clatter. Meanwhile, gripping his head, a tense Chonson can't figure out what it was. Some incomprehensible memory popped into his head. As the boy pondered, trying to realize whose memories these were, he heard a deafening roar nearby. Rising to its feet, the crystal monster immediately rushed towards the young man, preparing to launch a powerful attack. The next instant, his fist made contact with the sturdy wall. Chonson was able to block his opponent's jab using the shield he created. Even though this shield was spiked, the guy noticed that the enemy was taking absolutely no damage. It's a golem-shaped monster, after all. It has incredible survivability. Trying to hold back the crystal creature's attack, the young man realized that he would not be able to resist such power. Immediately afterward, the mana shield shattered into pieces, and the guy in turn recoiled without taking a single bit of damage. If those memories he got are true, then although it's a pretty strong golem monster, its weaknesses and tactics will be the same as before. The so-called golem monster has no particular weaknesses. If he does take damage, he can immediately recover. In such a case, it is recommended to deal damage from different sides at the same time if possible. In this case, it is recommended that Chonson should be able to deal damage to different sides at the same time. We need to create nets with equal radius of removal, using the skill user as the center point, and whoever gets caught in the net will move as the user tells them to. When the monster ran into the range of the skill, Chonson clenched his fist, glaring ruthlessly at his opponent. At the same moment, dozens of blades flew out from various points in the net and swept at the golem. There was an explosion and huge shards of crystals scattered in all directions. When the smoke from the destruction cleared, Chonson saw the golem-shaped monster in front of him falling apart. Stepping closer to the corpse, the young man exhaled with relief. The guy used to think that this net world was just an auxiliary skill with which he could create items faster. It seems that the effectiveness of the skill tends to increase. Also, this ability can now be used to attack on its own. Suddenly, the system alerted Chonson that the boss had been defeated. When the guy saw the system window in front of him, he wondered if he could look up information about the monster or the dungeon. As suddenly, an unknown purple energy began to gather from the collapsed body of the golem monster. While the guy looking at the cluster of mana in his palm was wondering what it was, the system alerted him that the passive skill, Magic Absorption, had been activated. There's an incredible magical power emanating from this thing. What could it possibly be? Absorbing this strange energy, Chonson decided to finally figure out what had happened to him in the last few minutes. Memories from his previous life. He doesn't know what exactly this previous life means, but the guy knows for sure that these memories are his, and the one the young man remembers is definitely him. Or to be more precise, it's another him in a couple of years. In this future, the whole world has fallen. Things too horrible to mention were happening. Shin inherited all the memories of that. But even if it is the future, it may not be the future of the world the guy is in now. Too much of what he just learned didn't add up to actual events. Even the status screen in front of him wasn't there in his past life. And that can only mean one thing. Shin really became a player. Player is a term used for a select few who have awakened. Based on many of Chonson's memories, players do not yet exist at this point in time. About 2 years from the current events, in another reality, a small number of awakened ones were chosen to become players. A blue screen appeared that only a select few could see, and Mong was among them. In the future, this mysterious thing was called a system, which sounded more like a joke. It was enough to shock the awakened ones. It wasn't just the system that was given to the players. All players were given different rewards. For example, strength and skills different from what they had before. The system and rewards came out of nowhere. They were used by the players and caused them to boom in comparison to other awakened. Thanks to the guild leader Toyun, who also happened to be the chosen one, the Duwon Guild, of which Shin Jongseong was a member, was able to become a first-class guild. The boy had nothing to do with it, but it encouraged him to grow. To make sure that he would stay in the growing guild, the young man made a constant effort to develop his skills. In the system window, you can find out the skills and experience you have learned. When the guy first heard about the system, he thought it must be very convenient. And so it turned out to be, in fact. If his skills and experience carried over from a previous life, then the passive magic absorption skill used on the corpse of the golem was one that didn't exist in his previous life. Chonson had never heard of any player having something like this. The description says that if the amount of magic collected exceeds the limit, then a reward will be given. I wonder if the rewards are only given to Chonson himself. Also, it says that this skill gathers energy from infected mana. After realizing this, the guy immediately had an idea on how to get this magic. However, now is not the time to think about that. As he approached the corpse of the dead head of the Duwon Guild, the young man looked at it sadly. The guy decided he needed to take care of the bodies of his former comrades first. A few hours later, Hunters Association headquarters. As the man pulls down the blinds and looks out into the street, a girl standing nearby asks the senior if they really should have let this kid go home. When he asked what she was talking about, the woman pointed out that there was something very strange about the situation. A small guild was mopping up an unidentified dungeon and got caught in an incident. 4 out of 5 people died. However, the only survivor is a D-ranked sapper. As the man with the tie in his pocket continues to stare at the boy outside the window, the girl adds that it wouldn't have been unusual if that guy had just run away while the others fought. But it wasn't like that. He even took care of the bodies and delivered them to the association. The gate to the dungeon had already disappeared, and so no more clues could be found. What do you think? I think there's something wrong here. Could a D-ranked support have killed a hunter? With a concerned glance at her colleague, the woman inquired. In turn, after hitting her on the head with a file folder, the man asked the girl to come to her senses. This is not a civil case. She knows it herself. Even if something strange happened, you can't find out what happened in the dungeon. You can only gather evidence as it emerges. When the girl, holding back tears and holding her head, tried to find the words to say something in response, the colleague asked if she had any objections. He then added that this happens quite often at this time. Waving a folder of documents, the man with the tie in his pocket explained that hunters often don't report finding a gate and go missing there. If they reported the discovery of the dungeon to the association, there would be an auction. However, instead of getting paid for it, the awakened usually choose to risk their lives and go there secretly. After all, it's almost impossible for a small guild to win at auction. Leaving back to his office, the man advised a coworker to call that kid in for further investigation or something. Heading back to his office, he looks thoughtfully at the file of that boy in his hands. So his name is Shin Jongseong, isn't it? The man has talked about it before, but this doesn't seem like a normal case. The situation is understandable, but he still feels like something is wrong. First of all, that kid was too calm during the interrogation. He had witnessed the incident with little to no experience in dungeons, so it would make sense that he would panic. Something had been missed, but this guy was explaining everything clearly. Of course, maybe it's just that kind of person. The investigator had met people like that many times before. Either way, something is definitely wrong, but the man doesn't know what it is, and it's upsetting him. Exhaling unhappily, he realized there was no need to worry about that right now. The only thing is to check everything more thoroughly. Meanwhile, Chonson pensively walks down the street staring at his phone. Every way you look at it, something's wrong. An unidentified gate? The guy doesn't remember this dungeon from his past life. On top of that, all the guild members had seen the gate request form. It was definitely stamped by the Hunters Association. However, the association itself said that all the dead members of the Duwon Guild were registered as having died in an unidentified dungeon. It can only mean one thing. Someone impersonated the association and deceived the Duwon Guild. Or the Hunters Association itself is involved. But what worries Chonson the most is that this kind of thing might not only happen to the Duwon Guild. As the investigator said, missing people in unidentified gates had already become a problem. The guy doesn't know the whole story, but there's only one topic in all the guilds in the news. They all have players, such as the guild leader, Moon Toyun, and even young talents who will become heroes in the future. Someone wants to wipe these heroes off the face of the earth, which means that Shin Jung-seong must now carefully conceal his abilities. He's the only survivor of an unsolved case. If the guy behaves suspiciously, he's going to be under attack. The youngster has about 2 years to prepare before his first player selection. And so you should not delay, and it's time to activate all the skills and develop them. Chonson needs to find a way to develop quickly without attracting attention. If there was one useful skill, it would make the guy's job a lot easier. And, just as he was leafing through the list, the young man noticed something interesting. Got it! I found it! Chonson pronounced, extending a finger toward the system window. It's been a whole year since those events. Deep in the forest, there are loud sounds of fierce fighting. Striking with his sword, the blonde guy once again runs into his opponent's block. From the force of the strike, the blunted blade of the blade immediately cracked. At the same moment, the green-jacketed hunter's steel sword broke in half. While the guy was desperately looking at his broken weapon, the enemy hit him with the hilt of his mace with all his might. Fortunately, the blonde had time to put up a successful block with his hands, and wasn't particularly hurt after such a powerful attack. After flying a few meters away, the guy stuck the blade of a broken blade and used it to slow down. The hunter, who had risen to his feet, looked with genuine horror at the fierce foe approaching him. In turn, the monster jumped into the air with great speed, bringing his mace behind his back. When the enemy landed on the spot where the blonde stood with a thunderous crash, the frightened boy had already managed to jump back to a safe distance. Looking at the monster with fear, the panting hunter with a broken sword crawled back to his teammates. In contrast, his opponent was feeling fine, and after pulling his mace out of the ground, he was already heading towards the squad of hunters, staring helplessly at him. This monster is called the Lord of the Gnolls. D. A gnoll of high rank. Physical abilities are higher than the average gnoll. Its skin is tough not only physically, but it is also resistant to magic. Helplessly pointing the stump of his sword at the monster with a trembling hand, the blonde can't understand what the Gnoll Lord is doing in the E-rank dungeon. Even D-rank hunters said this creature was difficult to fight. While the frightened guy was saying this, the monster had already taken off, pouncing on its victim. At the same second, a tank with a shield popped up from the rear of the squad. Once on the front lines, the man barely managed to block an enemy attack. From the power of the strike, the dazed tank felt its shoulders crack and shift. Realizing that he couldn't stand up to this monster alone, the man shouted to his partners that they wouldn't be able to hold out much longer this way. "Do what you want, but do some damage to him!" shouted the tank in desperation, urging his comrades into action. The god of death of low-level hunters. The Gnoll Lord is so called not only for his physical abilities. Since monsters at this rank are vulnerable to magic, any team of hunters relies on just that. But the Gnoll Lord defied that logic. The hunters, confident in low-level magic, were frightened for the first time. The price of such insolence and negligence, however, is usually the complete destruction of the team. There is only one physical damage fighter in their squad, but the blonde man is bad at hand-to-hand combat, and his weapon is broken. And if there's nothing else to fight, how is he supposed to attack? If he had known this was going to happen, he wouldn't have been greedy and gathered as many people as possible. Who would have thought that this guy's desire to use as few people as possible and hire a mage would backfire on him? In a moment of utter despair, the hunter suddenly heard a strange sound nearby. Near a nearby rock stands a man swinging a pickaxe. This is a helper and does not participate in battle, but plays the role of a gatherer and loader of side resources such as magic stones. Anyone with even a small amount of mana sensitivity can handle this, and so such people don't get much recognition or respect among the awakened. Simply put, they are the errand boy for the team. Noticing him, the blonde remembered that they had a helper. How could he be so careless with his pickaxe when his teammates might die soon? But in that instant, the hunter noticed something unusual. 3. This young man can create items out of mana. Although this guy has the ability to create, you can't expect high quality from him. But unfortunately, you don't get to choose. Realizing that this was his last chance to save his life and the lives of his partners, the blonde man called out to the helper standing calmly to the side. Hearing this, Chonson indifferently turned around and looked at him. "You're a maker, aren't you? You know how to make swords?" The hunter who ran up to him asked worriedly. Still looking at the blonde unemotionally, the guy replied that of course he knew how to do it. Holding out the stump of his broken sword to him, the hunter politely asked the young man to make him a sturdy new blade. However, after apologizing, Chonson explained that he is a helper, not a support, and therefore such actions are not part of his duties. In turn, the exasperated blonde shouted that now was not the time to talk like that. Doesn't the guy see what's going on? His squad could be dead soon. And if they can't handle the boss, Chonson will die too. After hearing him out, the helper closed his eyes and exhaled unhappily. After starting to create the sword, the guy agreed to help and explained that he had one condition. When we clear the dungeon, everyone should forget about my ability. And when we divide the loot, I want to get as much as the amount of loot as a normal sapper would get. If you agree, I'll help, Chonson said, handing the blonde man the sword he had just created. The hunter looked at the sword in his hand in surprise and noted that for someone who couldn't find a job as a creator and got a job as a helper, the quality of the work was excellent. But still, did the guy really think that the dungeon could be cleared with only this weapon? Why is he so stubborn? And what do you mean? Forget about his ability. Only? That's funny, Shin muttered with a smirk. Good weapons are an essential element of dungeon sweeping, and the creator can give some assurance. As long as you have that element, you'll be able to mop up the dungeon. Next day, Guild Overkill, one of the 3 largest guilds in Korea. A woman in low black shoes walks down the hallway. Walking up to the door, she gently knocked inside. Come in, the man said, leaning his elbow on the desk. Upon entering the office, the red-haired girl informed the leader that the Hunters Association had sent a request for cooperation. Looking thoughtfully into the void, the man in the chair asked if it was about the errors in the dungeon ranks. In turn, the woman replied that it was. At first glance, it's an ordinary request for cooperation. But it seems that the association is willing to pay as much as the other party to the contract wishes. The leader then remarked that it appeared that the Hunters Association simply had no choice. It was on the news today that a squad of low-level hunters were able to mop up a dungeon with an A-rank bug. If you look at it, those youngsters aren't anything extraordinary. Yet they managed to get out of there alive. However, the leader noticed some familiar faces. He's definitely seen this guy somewhere before. Seko Don also had a dungeon with an A-rank error a couple weeks ago. A man was sent to the area, and so he ended up at the scene. And the leader is pretty sure he saw this guy there. According to the information given to him, he was a regular helper. Even with the new gates, the chances of making a mistake in a dungeon are still incredibly small. And the situations in which there were survivors in case of a rank error can be counted on the fingers of one hand. But this helper was a member of a team that turned out survivors not once, but twice already. This can't be a mere coincidence. The girl standing next to him interrupted the leader's musings, noting that it seemed like there were more and more dungeons with rank errors lately. For example, a D-rank dungeon that had become a B-rank dungeon a couple of days ago, and the entire team that had gotten there was instantly destroyed. Closing his eyes with annoyance, the man remarked that the Hunters Association must have a lot of problems. Meanwhile, the girl agreed with him, adding that many people criticize the association. After all, it was their job to analyze, predict, and announce the dungeon ranks. That uncle at the Hunters Association must be suffering from the whole situation. Turning around to his ward, the leader said that those with the trespass skill were getting more and more. Therefore, he suggested that an additional commission be introduced and observe the situation. The man then inquired of the woman regarding what he had asked her to look into. The girl, on the other hand, replied that she had searched everywhere, but had not found any A-rank or higher weaponsmiths. However, she did manage to get a B-rank weapon from a Japanese blacksmith. When she suggested that the leader check this sword, he reminded her that any weapon below A-rank is destroyed when he applies his skill. Rising from the table, the man noted that few gunsmiths were sappers. He asked his ward to look for more or he would soon ruin all his weapons. Suddenly, there was a knock on the door behind. A man with a sturdy build entered the office and informed Tae-hyung that something had happened. Coming out from behind the desk, the leader inquired as to what had happened. The thug said that he had received an urgent message from the Hunters Association. He checked the location, and it was the D-rank dungeon where the newcomers from the Overkill Guild had gone as a free attack team. And when Tae-hyung asked the man what rank the dungeon was now, the man replied that the rank had risen from D to C. With an irritated sigh, the leader remarked that there was no way they could lose the newcomers right now. The situation seemed to be an emergency. And that's why Tae-hyun will personally go there. Several reporters have already arrived at the scene of the ill-fated locked gate and a large crowd of gawkers has gathered. "This is the Overkill Guild," suddenly shouted someone from the crowd. The reporters immediately started asking questions of the guild leader, asking him to say something about the ongoing dungeon ranking errors. Someone shouted out that they had heard that the Hunters Association had sent the Overkill Guild a cooperation proposal. There was also the question of whether Tae-hyun had come in person because his guild members were inside. Running up to the leader who had ignored all the press, the woman with glasses thanked him for coming. She didn't expect the guild leader, Yoon Tae-hyun, to personally come here. When the man asked her what the situation was like inside, the girl told him that the attack team that had entered had 6 hunters, 2 supports, and 1 helper. They were all stronger than necessary, but the numbers didn't matter since the dungeon was now C rank. Looking at the locked gate with concern, the guild leader asked how long they had been there. The woman said that the newcomers had crossed the portal border about 2 hours ago. 2 whole hours. Dae-hyun said he didn't know how many of them were still alive, but he promised he'd do his best. After a while, the leader, holding a leather case in his hand, along with the red-haired girl, approached the gate. Stopping just before the portal, the man lowered his suitcase to the ground. He then extended his palm to the ward standing behind him. At the same moment, the woman slipped her hand into her purse and started pulling something out. Min Hee-soo, B-ranked support. Class, Space Opener. She is the secretary of the Overkill Guild and is able to create subspaces in closed places. 9. Taking a katana out of her bag, Hee-soo held it out to the guild leader. Taking the sword in his hand, Yoon Tae-hyun brought the weapon up to his face, whereupon it immediately burst into bright flames. Skill, Trespassing. The man swung his sword in a moment, drawing the fiery blade across the entire diameter of the locked gate. When the flames went out, the portal appeared to be chopped in half. The lower part of the dungeon entrance collapsed, revealing a passage in front of Yoon Tae-hyun. It was a skill that forcefully pierced its way to the mana accumulation and could break down any wall as a barrier, including the gate. However, when traveling to another dimension, the encroachment skill only affected the user. In addition, as expected, not every sword could withstand the power of such an incredible skill. When the guild leader gave her the broken katana, Hee-soo asked him to be more careful. Good. Yoon Tae-hyun, who had lifted the suitcase, answered her as he crossed the border of the cracked gate. After a while, he found himself in another dimension, on the other side of the portal. The picture before his eyes was not a comforting one. Looking around the area, Dae-hyun immediately noticed the temperature and humidity. Given that disgusting odor, it must be a reptile. Judging by the fact that the floor is clean, it's a somewhat intelligent monster. Given the rank of the dungeon, the answer is simple. Lizardman. Threat level. D. A lizardman that lives in tribal groups. Compared to other humanoid monsters, it lives for quite a long time. Life expectancy is proportional to intelligence and combat power. A glance at the corpses suggests the size of the group and their combat strength, as well as the level of the affected party as determined by the preliminary calculation. All the newcomers must be long dead by now. Dae-hyun couldn't help but think the worst in a situation like this, all things considered. But when the guild leader arrived at the location where the team was, he saw something he absolutely could not expect. The high-level lizard opened its fanged maw and pounced on the enemy. Meanwhile, a blonde-haired man with a two-handed sword blocked the enemy's attack. The archer standing to the side immediately began to help her partners, firing metal-tipped arrows at the enemies. One of the arrows hit its target, piercing the lizard man's liver. Things aren't going the way the guild leader expected. These newcomers managed not to die after waiting for reinforcements. What's more, it's the opposite. They're winning? Judging from their movements, the lizardmen are much stronger. Then how did the differences even out? While Dae-hyun was trying to figure out what was going on, he noticed something dangerous on the battlefield. The lizard man fighting the blonde-haired hunter knocked the weapon out of his hands with a swing of his sword. Realizing the helplessness of his situation, the man looked at his opponent doomedly. Approaching him, the monster swung his sword, preparing to cut him in half. In a moment, the guild leader, who had rushed towards the newcomer, snapped out of his seat, realizing that it wasn't too late to save him. But unfortunately, he didn't have time. There was a loud clang from the impact, which subsequently raised a cloud of dust and dirt. When the fog cleared, everyone saw that the lizard man's sword had made contact with the mana blade. Dazedly looking at the thing, the monster can't figure out where it came from. In turn, Tae-hyun, who runs up to help, tries to realize what's happened. Is that magic? No, it's a weapon made right in the air. But by whom was this sword created? At that moment, their gazes crossed. This is it. The same creator that the Overkill guild leader, Yoon Tae-hyun, was looking for. This guy is definitely the strongest helper in the world. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and after hesitating for a moment, Chonson glanced suspiciously at the man standing across from him. 10, the young man said, pointing his finger at the stranger. When the guy pointed out that it was very strange, explaining that he remembered exactly what 9 came out, an annoyed Taehyung asked him what the hell he was doing. At the same second, on the battlefield, a red lizardman struck one of the newcomers with his sword with all his might. The gray-haired swordsman immediately flew back at the mage, hitting his back hard against the ground. Approaching him, the monster swung his sword, bringing it behind his head. This tense situation was noticed by the guild leader. In the same instant, he took off, leaving Chonson behind. The man immediately swung the katana he took out of its leather case before dashing out, preparing to block his opponent's attack. The guy who stayed back looked at the open suitcase and remarked that he didn't expect Yoon Tae-hyun to personally come to the rescue. Plus, why is this man carrying around a weapon he doesn't even use? Is it a backup? While Chonson, who was holding the pickaxe on his shoulder, was pondering this, a gust of hot wind blew into his face. The glowing blade of the guild leader made contact with the enemy's sword, stopping the blow completely. In a moment, the entire space around him was filled with scalding flames, enveloping Taehyun's katana and his opponent. Waving his hand, the man shouted for the newcomers to retreat from the area. Taking his mangled partner under his arm, the mage turned around and thanked the leader. While the two were running away, Taehyun had already knocked the weapon out of his opponent's hands with one swing. Immediately afterward, he activated the trespass skill again, making a narrow swing with his katana. In the next second, Yoon Tae-hyun was behind his enemy's back, making several lightning-fast sweeps with his red-hot sword. The lizard man, before he even realized what had happened, suddenly found himself cut several times. Due to wounds incompatible with life and profuse bleeding, the monster immediately fell dead to the ground. Taehyun isn't even fighting at full strength yet. It's a B-rank weapon, but even it's too weak to withstand the power of trespass. However, the battle was still not over. While the leader was wondering what to do with his broken sword, another ferocious lizardman pounced on him. Running up close to the man, the monster delivered a sudden blow with its tail. Although this attack was incredibly strong, Taehyun was still able to block it, but the man himself flew a decent distance away. When the guild leader who had miraculously stayed on his feet was beside him, Chonson called out to him. With a glance pointing at the cracked blade of the blade, the guy wondered if this was what happened every time Taehyun used the skill. Helper remarked that this was just incredible wear and tear for such a weapon. The annoyed leader asked if the boy was getting into a fight, as suddenly the displeasure on his face was replaced by genuine surprise. Shin Chongseong, standing in front of him, had already managed to create a katana. Moving the sword in space, the young man suggested that Taehyun take this and not ruin the poor weapon. Dazedly looking at the blade, the guild leader couldn't understand for a while how this guy had created a katana with a single swing. A gunsmith, and not just any gunsmith, but a very skilled one. But why is he a helper? Daehyun had heard that low-ranked sappers sometimes went to the dungeon as helpers. But why this guy? His thoughts were interrupted by Chonson reaching out his palm to the bloody katana the leader held in his hand. Taking the damaged sword, the boy explained that he had one condition. If Daehyun wanted to use the weapon he had created, he had to forget about the boy and his skills after he had cleared the dungeon. However, as he reached out his hand to the sword hanging in space, the leader gestured that he wouldn't just forget about it if the young man wanted him to. Unfortunately for him, it was the wrong answer. If you don't want that, then go ahead and chop everyone down with your high-class weapon, Shin Chongseong indifferently said as he began destroying the blade he had recently created. Exhaling unhappily, Taehyun realized that the weapon was destroyed as soon as this guy used a skill on it. Whatever the case, the man needed at least a couple of these swords. Got it, I promise to forget, said the leader, agreeing to the helper's terms. Fine, go forth and burn. With a satisfied smirk, Chonson answered him. Grabbing the katana in his hand, Daehyun immediately rushed into battle without delay. The green lizardman swings his sword and strikes his opponent. The man across from him, holding a blade in his right hand, used his special skill, encroachment. Immediately after, he put his weapon in front of him, blocking the enemy's attack. The heated katana blade immediately began to melt the dazed monster's sword. The next instant, to Taehyung's surprise, his opponent's weapon shattered into small pieces. The man only wanted to repel the attack, but this monster's weapon was simply blown apart, and the control is noticeably better than usual. Is the weapon itself that much stronger? A creator capable of making weapons of at least B rank? That's interesting enough. While the guild leader was pondering this, the lizard man who had approached him had already prepared to strike. However, that didn't bother Taehyung one bit anymore. The only thing he was curious about was to see what this weapon in his hands could do. Would he be able to use his skill to its full potential? As he stabbed his katana blade into the monster's chest, the leader activated Trespass at full power. A stream of deadly red flame was immediately released, melting everything in its path and leaving only ash behind. After that, Taehyung grabbed the lizard man's shoulder. Leaning against the melted monster, the leader pulled his sword from its body and in one deft movement, jumped on its back. Bringing the blade above his head, the man activated Trespass for the second time in a row. At the same moment, he cold-bloodedly pierced his opponent's skull with his sword, once again scattering punishing fire all over his body. The monster died on the spot before Taehyung even removed the katana from its head. As the compressed remains of the lizard man fell to the ground, the guild leader brought the bloody blade up to his face. Not a scratch. So he needs at least. His pensive thoughts were interrupted by the cheers of the newcomers. They delightedly thanked the guild leader for coming to their aid in time. They had survived only because of him. No one seems to be badly hurt. That's good to hear, Yoon Tae-hyun muttered as he approached his charges. The newcomers told him that they couldn't even fight with their weapons, but they had only managed to hold out thanks to that guy promptly creating new swords for them. Then the leader looked suspiciously at the young man sitting nearby. Based on the newcomer's words, his assumptions proved to be correct. "What's your name?" Taehyung asked, approaching the squatting boy from the back. Zipping up his backpack, the guy asked the guild leader why he needed to know the name of some assistant. The man explained that they should know each other at least by name. After that, he introduced himself to the boy as Yoon Tae-hyung. Taking the backpack in his hands, the boy looked thoughtfully at the leader. "My name is Shin Chong-seong," he said as he approached the man. Turning to the blonde-haired swordsman standing behind Taehyung's back, Chong-seong said he would leave the mana stones at the entrance. But suddenly taking the young man by the shoulder, the leader asked him to wait for a while. Yoon Tae-hyun suggested that the boy leave his things here and go with him to the room with the boss. When the man snatched the bags from his hands, Chonson reminded the man that he was only a helper. Placing the backpacks with mana stones next to the blonde-haired hunter, the leader explained that they had already discovered a bug in this dungeon. If they didn't defeat the boss, no one would be able to get out, be it a helper or a support. However, when the boy pointed out that Taehyung could defeat the boss on his own, the man reminded him that the boy had already seen the fact that no weapon could handle his skills. No matter how capable the leader was, wouldn't it be pointless if he destroyed the weapon the helper had created for him? "My weapon can't break," Chongson said suddenly, glaring at him confidently. In turn, Taehyung explains that it's only the guy who thinks that. They're in a dungeon with a bug right now. The creatures living here are not ordinary lizardmen, and if the boss is the same, extra caution doesn't hurt. Realizing that there was no way he could get away with it, Chonson sighed unhappily. "Okay," the young man said, not picking up the bags and leaving them on the ground. Approaching the leader, the boy clarified something. After all, he just needs to walk beside him, doesn't he? Without answering him, the man just smirked. Soon the two were in the boss's chambers. As it turned out, no one was going to be hospitable to them. The lizard lord sat on his throne. Danger level C+. The final form of the lizard lord after over 100 years of survival and molting. Despite its small size, it is several times greater in strength and speed than its kin. It is better to ignore existing hazard levels and information on them. "Let's put an end to this as soon as possible," Dae-hyun said confidently, activating Trespass. But when the man explained that if they delayed, the weapon might fall apart, an irritated Chonson wondered if he was mocking him. The guy said it wouldn't fall apart, and if the guild leader doesn't believe it, then it's about time we put it to the test. Just seeing the two men at the entrance to the room, the lizard lord raised his spear and pointed it at the uninvited guests. At the same second, the monster harnessed beside it snapped out of its seat, pouncing on the enemies. As the creature smacked its paws hard into the spot where they stood, Taehyun and Jungseon jumped back to a safe distance, dodging the attack. At the same instant, the guild leader pushed off the wall behind him and swung his sword, preparing to slash his opponent. However, the enemy was not so simple. Only when he noticed the man with the sword approaching him, he bounced back a few meters. Although Dae-hyun knew that these monsters were quite intelligent, he hadn't expected such a deft and deliberate move from a common underhanded beast. But no matter how strong the enemy was, he didn't care one bit. The man immediately rushed towards the monster with confidence, preparing to strike again. This time, the enemy had nowhere to retreat to. He was trapped in a corner. But suddenly, a lizard lord jumped out from behind the back of the underhanded beast, holding a long spear behind his back. The next moment, there was a loud clang as the metal sword blade and spear tip made contact. Blocking Taehyung's attack, the monster pushed him away from him, and then, out of inertia, jumped farther away himself. The lizard lord sat on the back of his beast and grabbed the reins. Fire began to spurt from the huge riding monster's mouth. After that, he roared loudly, and bright flames from his throat were released outwards. But as he thrust his katana forward to try and block the attack, Taehyung noticed a strange blue matter in front of him. A huge shield was created in front of his face, blocking the entire flow of all sizzling flames. And as expected, it was Shin Chong-seong standing nonchalantly behind him who put up that shield. When the riding monster pounced on him again, the guild leader immediately bounced back to the helper. He asked the boy if he wasn't a regular armor maker. The boy explained that a shield could also be a weapon under certain circumstances. When we get out of here, I'll have a lot of things to ask you about, Shin Chong-seong, Yoon Tae-hyun said with a satisfied smile as he activated Trespass. In the same instant, he snapped out of his seat, breaking the speed of sound in the blink of an eye. But even such an incredibly high-speed dash didn't even strain the lizard lord. Suddenly, the tip of his spear turned into a long metal chain. Flying towards the red-hot katana, the chain immediately tied tightly around it. After shackling his opponent's weapon, the monster yanked on the hilt, trying to wrestle the sword from Taeyeon's hands. But instead of letting go of his sword, the guild leader took advantage of the situation and rushed towards the enemy. "Stop suffering nonsense and fight," Shin Chong-seong irritably muttered, extending his arm forward. When another katana appeared in Taehyung's other hand, he asked the guy with a chuckle, "Didn't he just ask him to test this sword?" Hearing those words, Chonson advised not to speak of his blades as if it were a pet. The very next moment, the guild leader flew towards the riding monster and inflicted a deep wound on it with a single swing of his katana. Immediately then, the man hurled one of his two swords at the lizard lord, sitting on the back of the underhanded beast. Not without difficulty, but the creature managed to dodge the attack and not get injured. However, it was already completely useless. While he was trying to anticipate his opponent's movements, Daehyun was already in his face. The man swung his leg and slammed his foot into his enemy's chest, knocking the spear out of his hands. While the monster that had fallen to the ground was trying to get back to its feet, the guild leader had already managed to leap out of his seat and pounce on it in one leap. Bringing the katana behind his back, Taehyun made a wide swing and activated the trespass skill. Launching a full amplitude fire attack, he severed the lizard lord's arm with his sword. Holding onto his knees, the monster, even with his arm cut off, was not going to give up and was looking for a way out of this situation. Suddenly, he noticed a lone armorer standing nearby. Realizing that this was his last chance, the lizard lord immediately picked up his spear from the ground and dashed towards the young man. But when he ran up close and tried to thrust his spear into the boy's neck, the tip hit a barrier that suddenly appeared. "Who do you think you're pointing your weapon at?" Shin Chong-seong eerily uttered, suppressing the enemy's confidence with his terrifying aura. While the monster was trying to realize what its spear tip had hit, an angry Taehyun came up behind it, holding Trespass at the ready. Meanwhile, outside the dungeon, there is still a crowd of reporters and gawkers watching the situation. Suddenly, the color of the locked gate began to change from red to blue. "The gate is finally opening. Did they really succeed in clearing the dungeon?" At the same moment, a group of people from the Overkill Guild came out of the portal. Immediately, reporters ran up and started asking the guild head, Yoon Tae-hyun, what had happened in the dungeon and whether he had managed to defeat the boss. Hee-soo, who approached him after a while, inquired if the leader was injured. When the man replied that he was fine, the newcomers standing behind him thanked their savior again, explaining that they would have been dead by now if Yoon Tae-hyun hadn't come to the rescue. Meanwhile, Jong-seong approached his blonde partner and handed him the bag of mana stones and said that he had already received the money in advance, so he had to go. The hunter took the backpack from his hands and thanked him for a job well done. Handing over the burden, the young man immediately turned around. Not wanting to linger here, the boy walked off into the sunset, leaving behind him the press surrounding his now former dungeon partners. Holding out a microphone to Daehyun, one of the reporters asked the Overkill Guild leader how he managed to clear the dungeon so quickly. It must have been easy for him. When the man turned around, however, he replied that it wasn't quite as people imagine it to be. He was not there alone. While a surprised Taehyun looks through the crowd, trying to find that kid there, His partners tell the press that as the whole team was defending themselves, the guild leader handled everything. Yes, that's exactly what happened. All their weapons broke, and the newcomers can't imagine how it would have all ended if the guild leader hadn't shown up in time. Grabbing one of the newcomers by the shoulders, Taehyung asked what they were talking about. The weapon was to thank the person who made it for them. It's only because of that guy that they've been able to last this long. Not understanding what the leader was saying, the puzzled subordinate immediately asked who he meant. To the supporter who was there as an assistant. Weapons master. Yoon Tae-hyun reminded him without letting go of his shoulders. However, to his surprise, the perplexed newcomer asked the leader which armorer he was referring to. Glancing awkwardly at his companions, he explained that he knew that the helper was a sapper. But that boy had no such abilities. The archer standing next to him also remarked that she hadn't seen anything like the creature. When Taehyung asked the newcomers if they hadn't seen that boy creating weapons, all of the wards responded that they didn't understand what the man meant. Maybe he's talking about the pickaxe. Wait, I don't even think that helper has a pickaxe. No, he had one, but he must have lost it. But luckily, he was able to collect all the mana stones. Meanwhile, while the newcomers were discussing this, Yoon Tae-hyun looked at them dumbfoundedly. What had happened? This guy had created weapons for all of them in front of their eyes, and these people had apparently forgotten about it. Suddenly, the leader remembered the moment when the boy had created him a katana and asked him to forget everything about his ability. What the hell? Fee! How did he use an A rank or higher skill? After noticing the guild leader acting strangely, a bulky man and a red-haired girl came up behind him and asked him what was wrong. Suddenly, Taehyung turned around and threw the leather case into the hands of the man standing behind him. In the same second, he took off from his seat and headed somewhere with great speed, leaving his subordinates behind. The two men stared at him in bewilderment, and for some time they could not understand what had suddenly come over their leader. In turn, Yoon Tae-hyun continued to run somewhere very fast. Where the hell did he go? Is he gone already? How could he get out of everyone's sight so quickly? Realizing that he would no longer be able to find him, the guild leader stopped where he was. At this very time, a few buildings away from him stands a Chonsun hidden behind a wall. Yoon Tae-hyun had missed him. Why had everyone forgotten about this boy's abilities while the man's memory remained unchanged? Why is this boy hiding his power? These and many other questions the head of the Overkill Guild will have to solve in the near future. Meanwhile, he had already been overtaken by a bewildered thug and a red-haired girl. They ran up to him and asked the leader what had happened. Hisu, right now. I need to find someone. I've located Shin Jongseong. Min Hisu reported to the guild leader, Overkill. The girl reported that this guy had entered the D-rank dungeon at Sonpagu at about 1 o'clock in the afternoon as part of a group of 5. Sitting at his desk, Yoon Tae-hyun praised the female employee for doing a good job and remarked that Seongpa-gu wasn't far from here. In turn, the puzzled girl told the guild leader that there was something she wanted to ask. Jongseong is just a D-rank creator. So why was the boss so interested in him? Is that what it seems like to you, Hisu? Taehyung leaned on his arm, looking thoughtfully at the clipboard. Of course, a D-rank creator. It's hard to think otherwise. His status, background, by all available information, this guy is D-rank. That said, he is the owner of the payment skill. That one skill disproves everything. A-rank payment skill. As a payment for the creation of an item can subject the creditor to a request. The essence and mandatory nature of the request depends on the user's skill. Payment's qualifications were very high. Daehyun had never met anyone who used it like that. Why would an ability that could be used to get rich be used to hide one's identity? Such a weaponsmith could easily gain a level. No matter what, the guild leader would be sure to inquire about everything the next time they met. That time when they saw each other for the first time, Yoon Tae-hyun felt something he had never felt before. This incredible blade created by Shin Chongsun was unimaginably sturdy. The Overkill Guild leader could fight at full strength for the first time without worrying about weapons breaking. The man met many skilled blacksmiths who were considered the greatest. They really were masters of their craft, and their swords turned out to be quite good. However, before using this weapon in serious combat, Tae-hyun always tested it. Every single one of the blacksmiths across the board, even after seeing the might of this man, were confident that their brainchild would definitely withstand even the most difficult test. It was the same that day. The guild leader took the weapon in his hand, immediately activated the trespass skill right in front of the master and brought the sword behind his back. Cutting the air with a heavy, red-hot blade, he sliced the training exhibit standing in the forge in half. Unfortunately, as expected, the blade could not withstand such a load. Walking over to the counter, the man placed the broken sword in front of the master. Thus he tried every weapon sold in that market stall. When he saw the graveyard of swords he had created, the blacksmith screamed and grabbed his head. That's just the way it was. None of the masters met Yoon Tae-hyung's expectations. On the other hand, it was pretty obvious. Creation ability is limited by the type of conventional weapon and its durability. But this guy created something that went far beyond the limitations of abilities and species. It was like there were no limits at all. With Shin Jungseong's ability, it's possible. It's something that Yoon Tae-hyun didn't use because he didn't have a suitable weapon. The time to clear a D-rank dungeon with a team of 5 people is usually about 4 hours. Accordingly, there was about an hour left. After realizing this, the guild leader stood up from the table and asked Hisu what was left on his schedule for today. The man headed for the exit, and the red-haired girl reminded him that he had a meeting with the head of the Hyunmu Guild at 7 in the morning. After listening to her, Daehyun asked her to cancel the meeting and added that he would leave work early. There was no way he was going to miss that boy. The gate of the recently locked dungeon had just reopened. The huge orc boss, after receiving several slashing wounds, dropped dead. The hunter in armor stands in a fighting stance, wielding a two-handed sword, having just struck several killing blows at the monster. Staring in amazement at the corpse of the creature he killed, the knight can't believe that this sword was made by a helper. It just can't be. If this amount of mana in this blade can shatter a boss weapon, then it must be a C-rank ability. No! B-rank minimum! When the man's sword broke in two, he thought they were finished. But to think a helper has that ability. Delightful! Simply marvelous! The knight shouted contentedly, raising his mana-filled blade upwards to the brim. The hunter lifted the helmet's visors and remarked that he had never seen such a high-quality sword. Turning to see Chonsun walking with his bags behind him, the man thanked his fellow helper heartily. He then approached a mage from his squad and offered to take this guy to them if he wasn't a member of any guild. The girl didn't object, admitting that it was a great idea. She thought the boy was embarrassed to be walking around as a helper. The knight laughed good-naturedly, agreeing with his colleague and remarking that he had a good eye. Meanwhile, as he listened to their conversation and thought about his own thoughts, Chonsun glanced at the two men. He used more mana for that two-handed sword than he had intended. To think that this team is suffering like this even though it's not even a bug dungeon. As he approached the glowing stones, the boy tossed his bag beside him. The young man looked at the crystals in front of him, and memories from a year ago came flooding back to him. In that dungeon, he felt an incredible amount of mana that he had never felt before. After the boy absorbed the mana from the slain golem, and then when he spent all of it, it never appeared again. What he senses now is nothing more than the mana of an awakened D rank. But it's comforting to know that you don't have to have a huge mana supply to create a quality weapon, and so there's no problem with that. Who would have thought that memories of another life could be so helpful? The basic creator skill is creation, which helps in crafting special items. Although this skill is very intuitive, the quality is proportional to the amount of mana. However, there is a way to increase the effectiveness of the skill even for a normal D-rank creator. But it has not yet become known to the people of this world. Fortunately, thanks to the memories granted to him, Chanseong had already mastered it, and that way is to improve the level of understanding of a particular weapon. The more detailed the creator's understanding of the physics of the item, how it is made, and its features, the better the quality. And the good thing about this skill is that as quality increases, so does mana efficiency. So when using the same amount of magic and creating the same item, depending on the level of understanding, there will be a significant difference in quality. Shin Jongseong even now remembers how much he trained when he learned about this hidden feature. Studying materials, training as a supporter, and going to the workshop for weapon building classes. But in the end, the guy got more than he could have imagined. He doesn't know exactly how much better it became, but compared to the amount of mana used, this quality of the item created is incredible. However, it's still not enough. It's hard to use create and payment at the same time because of the mana limitation. The equipment that mana depends on is expensive, so there's no way to get it now. Chonsun can at least buy potions. It's the only mass-produced item that affects mana. We should order a couple. It's still going to be tough with a helper's salary, though. However, no one will take on a D-ranked support person. In that case, there's no choice. On the other hand, the result isn't bad, it's comforting. There wasn't much left before reaching the goal of mana absorption, about 20%. Be that as it may, unfortunately, a couple dungeons won't be enough. One cleared dungeon is just over 1% of mana. That's too low in efficiency. There was only one way left. Shin is worth going through a dungeon with a bug. It is the only option to absorb a lot of mana at a time. Several times more mana is absorbed there compared to other dungeons. It was exactly the kind of place he needed. The thing is, mistakes are hard to predict before you cross the gate. The last dungeon with a mistake would have been difficult to get through if that man hadn't come to the rescue. Taking the backpack with the loot in his hand, the guy realized that he needed to guess a dungeon with at least a C-rank boss and prepare himself. At this moment, the only way to grow as a D-rank awakened was to find out the reward for mana absorption. "Well done, everyone," the squad leader said contentedly as he and his comrades walked out of the opened gate. Waving to his partners, Knight suggests we meet again sometime. Looking at his trail, the calm helper realized that he had managed to erase their memories after all. Shin. A familiar voice was heard behind the boy's back. At this moment, the guy holding the bag on his shoulder turned around in surprise. The head of the Mass Murderers Guild and his ward were walking towards him in the park. Since they came here, it could only mean one thing. For some reason, the payment skill didn't work. "Remember me?" Yoon Taehyun inquired, walking up to the kid. Sighing irritably, Chonson scratched the back of his head and asked the man if he would believe him if he said he couldn't remember. "No," Taehyung replied succinctly, holding out a business card to the guy. Taking the card from his hand, the boy asked the intruder what business he had come for. While the guy was pensively looking at the contents of the business card, the guild leader explained that there was something he needed to talk to him about. After that, Yoon Taehyun asked the boy for a moment. "The Overkill Guild is one of the best in Korea. Jongsun can't join such a large guild yet. He needs to find an excuse and leave right away." "I don't have time. I'm in a hurry for an important meeting," Taehyung replied to the boy, turning around abruptly. "You won't regret this conversation," the guild leader suddenly said, grabbing him by the shoulder. He then added that he has no plans to take up much of Chonson's time. Besides, the man will pay for the entire dinner. With a casual glance at Hisa staring menacingly at him, the boy remarked that apparently being the head freed up a lot of time for Taehyung if he spent it on a D-ranked supporter. When the leader replied that that was about right, Chonson looked at him and realized that although he didn't particularly like it, the guy should still check out why the payment didn't work on this person. Walking up to the man, the guy reluctantly agreed to talk things over quickly. Hearing this, the guild leader smiled contentedly. "Sure," he said, following the boy's departure. An expensive car is parked at the entrance to an expensive restaurant. Yoon Taehyun, Min Hee-soo, and Shin Jong-seong sit at the same table and have dinner. "So, what business does the head of the Overkill Guild have with a D-ranked sapert like me?" the guy inquired, choosing what to eat next. The boy doubts it's all about having tons of free time to chat with him. "As you saw, I am a berserker. Because of my incredible strength, I need a weapon that can withstand such a load," Taehyun explained to him. "This is why the most important thing in a berserker's job is to find a supplier of suitable weapons. Of course, I've been to a lot of places looking for it, across the country and beyond. Starting with a blacksmith who was called the best in the business, and ending with the gunsmiths. If there was even the slightest possibility, Daehyun would order the weapons, and time and money wouldn't matter. But unfortunately, none of these people met the needs of the trespass skill. Every weapon Taehyung had ever held couldn't withstand his abilities. Then he was resigned to his fate, right up until I met him. This guy is the exception to all the rules, and the sword that Shin Jong-seong created was one of a kind." As he continued to eat, the boy sitting across from Taehyung realized that plata really had absolutely no effect on the man. He didn't think that a berserker had a nullification skill. That was very careless of him. From now on, the boy needs to use this skill more carefully on high-ranked hunters. "Shin Jong-seong, I'll put it bluntly," Yoon Taehyun suddenly said while holding the mug in his hand. "Would you like to join my guild?" After saying that, the leader added that he already knew that the guy wasn't a member of any guild. If he joined his guild, the man could promise that the boy would get only the best. He'll pay him 10 billion won to join. Daehyun will also pay separately for operating costs and dividends. The contract will be for 1 year, and the fee will increase by 10% each time it is renewed. However, when the leader decided to say that the rest of the details would be in the contract, Johnson politely interrupted him. The guy apologized and stood up from the table and explained that he wasn't planning on joining the guild right now, so he would have to decline the offer. "If that's all, I'll be going. And thanks for the food," the boy said, glancing at the two. Noticing that Shin Jongseong was already walking towards the exit, Taehyun jumped down from the table and called out to him. However, it was already too late. Hee-soo, who was sitting next to him, asked the guild leader in a puzzled manner why he had made such an offer. After all, he couldn't do that for no reason. But at that moment, when Hee-soo started to say that the conditions were too generous, Taehyung interrupted her. "If you'd experienced what I did then, you wouldn't talk like that," he said sadly, lifting the mug of tea. It had been a long time since Daehyun hadn't felt a weapon scream. With a blade like that, he felt like he could do anything. And it did. But still. Of course, it wasn't all just because of that feeling. The guild leader asked Hisa how much he thought all those high-ranking weapons he had destroyed in a year were worth. Withdrawing her gaze, the red-haired girl realized that the leader was indeed spending truly astronomical sums on weapons. Not only that, even though it breaks simply from not being able to handle the load, unless the weapon is above a certain rank, it will not allow the guild leader to use their abilities. Yes, if that were possible, then such a contracting fee is really negligible. Agreed with the leader Min Hee-soo. However, the red-haired girl had picked up on the fact that there was one problem left. The fact was that no one was capable of such a thing, considering those who were called the best. The fact that this guy had a creation skill didn't mean anything yet. "He definitely can," Yoon Tae-hyun said confidently. "And that's why the guild leader has only one wish. Whatever Shin Jong-sung asks for, the man wants to recruit him at any cost." Meanwhile, in the city, with a frustrated sigh, Chonson can't believe that the day has come when he turned down the top 3 guilds. Rejected the Overkill guild and Yoon Tae-hyun. It would help a lot, but it's too early. "Okay, it's okay. The guy just needs to be patient. This man is bound to find him again." A pungent odor of blood can be smelled throughout the dungeon. The loud clang of swords clashing can be heard in the distance. On the cold stone floor lay mountains of corpses of recently killed goblins. Meanwhile, an unknown creature had just chopped a man in half with a long, two-handed sword. Pointing his blood-smeared blade at his foe, the wounded, dumbfounded fellow asks him who he is. It's quite entertaining. At times like this, people usually howl and beg for mercy before they pass out. The gloating enemy smirked as he pinned the already dead victim to the ground with his foot. Is the one who becomes a hero any different? With trembling hands pointing his weapon at the enemy, the frightened young man asked why he suddenly wanted to kill his squad and take all the spoils. However, pulling the sword out of the corpse, the blue-haired man who had attacked said with annoyance that it was much more boring than he had expected. He then added that he wasn't going to tell the guy anything. He felt that telling something to someone who was about to die would be a waste of energy. But if the kid could beat him, he would definitely explain everything. "Then come to me quickly, if you don't want to die ignominiously," the stranger said grimly, slinging his two-handed sword over his shoulder. Tensely looking at the enemy, the hunter realized that he was not an easy opponent. Since this bastard fights with long weapons, the kid would definitely die at a distance. That's why the guy only has to rush forward and shorten the distance. Even if he loses an arm or a leg, he has to defeat his opponent. The hunter ran up to the stranger and immediately struck with his blade. But to his surprise, the enemy easily stopped the attack with his sword. "Not willing to give up so easily," the kid shouted furiously at the top of his voice. He began throwing blow after blow, trying to break through his opponent's block and injure him in some way to weaken his defenses. But at one point, the blue-haired man got tired of just watching these insignificant attacks. With a sharp lunge, he swung his sword and knocked the weapon out of the hunter's hands. This movement was so lightning fast that the terrified guy couldn't even keep track of what had just happened. As he stared dumbfounded at the blade flying out of his hands, the sound of a boot was heard nearby, cutting through the air with great speed. At the same second, the blue-haired man kicked his foot powerfully into the stomach of the hunter, who had no time to realize anything. This blow was so strong that the guy flew across the room, slamming into the opposite wall. "How sad," the stranger who had attacked him said sadly, looking at the boy writhing in pain and agony. Dragging the bloody sword blade on the ground behind him, the man grudgingly said that he had volunteered because it was the first hero slaying in a year. But who would have thought this dude would turn out to be nothing more than a lowlife? But the courage this guy showed is commendable. The moment the assassin raised his sword above his head, preparing to deal with the hunter, the boy, sitting on his knees in despair, begged his enemy for mercy. A moment later, the young man was chopped in half by a long two-handed sword. Now the shredded corpses of not only goblins, but humans as well, lie in this dungeon. Damn, I thought I was going to have to fight for the first time in a long time, the blue-haired man said disappointedly, looking down at the body beneath his feet. He then took out the sword from the corpse and added that this battle was so boring that it couldn't even be called a warm-up. And what's with the look of injustice on this guy's face anyway? Taking something out of his pocket, the assassin asked the dead man not to worry. He promised to be sure to report that the boy had fought the boss bravely and died a hero. It's a common thing in a dungeon with a ranking error, said the laughing man, taking a picture of his victim's dismembered remains on his phone. He stood still for a while longer and took pictures from different angles. Not bad, remarked the man contentedly, flipping through the gallery on his phone. His collection is finally complete. His whole life is devoted to collecting. Suddenly, the assassin shuddered with fear. Goosebumps ran through his body. I hate feeling that nasty energy. You either hide it or don't hide it anymore, the man said angrily, realizing where the source of his irritation was coming from. Show yourself, priestess. Coming out of hiding, the pale, purple-clothed woman waved her hand at the man and apologized to him. She was just here in a hurry as she had heard that there were valuable components here. The assassin in turn pulled the sword out of his victim, irritatedly explaining that no valuable components were anywhere near here. Only idiots are here. But when the blue-haired man passing the priestess said that he shouldn't have listened to his words and waited a bit, the woman interrupted him. Those words? Are you saying you want to go against his will? The executioner's will? The priestess inquired, giving the assassin a creepy look. Tisking unhappily, the man with the bloody sword on his shoulder remarked that the girl was incredibly sensitive, and then asked her to clean up the place. The woman told him to leave it to her, and the killer in turn recalled her recent promise. Don't forget your promise to send me on an S-rank hunter. I'm only tagging along with you for that, the blue-haired man said. Meanwhile, while the priestess was drawing a bloody pentagram in space with her arm outstretched, the assassin added that because of this bloody consciousness, he needed to kill them. However, he can't use his power to its fullest, and the moment the girl, asking not to worry, said she would be in touch with him soon, a crack appeared in the floor beneath her feet. A four-fingered monster arm immediately emerged from the gap that opened in the ground. Ah, child! The priestess shouted in rapture as she saw before her a huge creature crawling out of the bowels of the earth. He was really right. Meanwhile, a group of agents guard the newly opened gate from intruders. Chongsun, who was standing in the crowd at this time, glanced irritatedly at the man who was suddenly in front of him. Oh, so you're here too, said the camouflaged man, fixing his cap in a friendly manner, holding a leather case behind his back. Seeing this strange dude, Chongsun stared at him silently for a while longer. He then asked the masked man what he was doing here. You have good eyesight, recognizing me, the stranger remarked, looking at the boy with satisfaction. In turn, the guy explained that he only knew of one person who carried a weapon that way. He then asked Daehyun again what he was doing here. When the guild leader replied that he was of course going to the dungeon, Jongseong asked the man if he knew it was a D-rank gate. However, Taehyung explained that the guild member who was supposed to go on the raid today suddenly fell ill. He's here instead of that poor guy. Does that make sense? The bewildered lad undersaid as he was interrupted by a squad mate shouting that it was time to go in. The boy naturally knew that Yoon Taehyun would find him again, but he didn't realize it would happen so quickly. Ah, okay. It looks like Shin Jongseong will have to amend the original plan. After passing through the gate, the squad of hunters found themselves in a low-level dungeon. While Taehyung, holding the leather case tightly, walks ahead, Jongseon discreetly weaves behind. Deciding that now would be a good time to discuss their pressing problems in private, the man slowed down and let the boy catch up. Why don't you join the guild? Daehyun asked obsessively, glancing at the unsurprised boy. Meanwhile, Shin Jongseong reminded the leader that he had already turned him down. Irritated, the guy turned away and added that he didn't want to talk about it anymore. Did you hear about the gate auction that was in Chunhong this morning? Suddenly heard the conversation of the two partners ahead. The swordsman told the girl next to him that there were rumors that Hyunmu's guild had won the auction. The mage confirmed it, saying that a friend of hers from that guild had told her that they had set the price so high that no one had even tried to outbid them. After overhearing them, Zhangxiang wondered. The Hyunmu Guild had bought the C-rank gate? Did they really find something there? Interested in buying the gate? The man behind him suddenly inquired. After that, Taihyun added that if the guy joined his guild, he would then easily be able to acquire special gates above B rank. Since there are privileges only available to known guilds, for the awakened, the name of the guild is very important. People will envy or admire, and you will not only get a job, but also incomparable income and rewards compared to other awakened ones. In addition, together with the acquired rights, you will be able to make many demands. For example, you can get an entrance ticket to a special gate. Not only talent, but also the dynamics of relationships and politics play a big influence. Due to this structure, the rare treasures that can be obtained in such places are naturally captured by large guilds. Standing behind him, Taihyung told the guy that one should have a goal to strive for as an awakened one. Whatever it is, with the Overkill Guild, it will be easier for Zhangxiang to achieve that goal. The leader can't understand why he's refusing. At this moment, the boy abruptly stopped, warning the man that it was none of his business. Shin Chongxiang turned around and added that he understood why the leader was doing this. It was because probably no one had ever turned down an offer to join the Overkill Guild. So the guy decided to make something clear. There's no way he's joining any guild. When the boy had said all that, he immediately turned and walked on, leaving the stunned masked man behind. Taihyung wondered, looking after him. Was it because of the psychological trauma he had suffered after the destruction of the Long Guild, which the leader had read about in the report? Or maybe it's something else. But whatever it is, you can't give up. A band of hunters walks through a dark cave, with only the wizard's bright staff illuminating the area around them. Ugh, what the hell is this? Came the swordsman's indignant cry. Trying to shake the sticking cobwebs off his head, he can't figure out where they came from. Hearing his cries, the squad captain realized what lay ahead and decided to stop here. The shield maiden explained that this was the beginning of monster territory. And since all the hunters in his squad were new, the man decided to explain briefly, even though he was sure that all of his teammates had read the intel. The Legion Spider appears in this dungeon. The difficulty level of each creature is low. The peculiarity is that they live in groups. According to the results of reconnaissance, their number is about 50. This is a relatively small number. These monsters have paralytic poison in their fangs, and so comrades must be careful and make sure they don't get bitten. They're about to show up. Come closer. Yun Taihyun spoke, taking the blade he had just taken out of the leather case in his hand. Standing at the rear of the squad, the helper asked his partners not to worry about him and to prepare for battle. In turn, the guild leader who looked at him explained that all units were required to protect their supports and helpers. It was a rule that all hunters had to follow, regardless of ability or situation. But just as the lad decided to contradict him, a shout was heard from the front line warning of the enemy's advance. Standing in the optimal formation for battle, the group of hunters prepared for the coming battle. The hideous clacking of spider paws was heard not far from them. More legion spiders emerged from the depths of the cave. Looking at these terrifying monsters, the swordsman, trying to calm himself down, drew his blade towards the advancing enemies with trembling hands. Legion Spider. Personal danger level. E group danger level. D-. A spider-type monster that lives in the Legion. The danger level varies depending on the size of the Legion. We will win if we do as we have been taught! The swordsman who had come forward shouted furiously, trying to encourage his comrades. At the same second, a horde of venomous spiders pounced on the squad of hunters. The guy standing in the vanguard immediately adopted a fighting stance, shifting his body weight to his left leg. In one swift movement, he sliced in half the enemy that had pounced on him. He then proceeded to deliver blow after blow intensely, killing his opponents one by one. Meanwhile, the mage wasn't standing idle either. While the shield maiden blocked the passage of the opponents with her strongest defensive skill, the girl extended her staff in front of her and cast a powerful spell. At the same instant, her staff glowed a bright blue light and shot a crushing stream of wind at the enemies, knocking all the spiders back a decent distance. The coordinated work of the three of them allowed them to easily withstand an incredible number of enemies. Looking at this mesmerizing sight, Yun Taehyun mentally noted that his partners were fighting quite well for D-rank hunters. Fortunately, that meant he didn't have to worry about them. But at that moment, Shin Changxiang, standing behind him, exclaimed in surprise as he looked at the other passage of the cave. Looks like it's not just a couple dozen spiders, the boy noted, looking at the huge number of opponents that had suddenly appeared nearby. The Legion spiders immediately pounced on the nearby Overkill guild leader. Meanwhile, the masked man, preparing to give battle to the enemy, activated the trespass skill. His katana immediately erupted in bright flames, and then Tae-hoon finished off several opponents with a single swing, chopping them to pieces. The remains of the charred dead spiders fell to the ground in front of his feet. As Tae-hoon continued to slice through the enemies with his glowing blade, he realized that the survivability of these creatures was quite low compared to other monsters. Therefore, he only needed to release a little bit of sword key energy. There was no need to even use the blade. This way, the guild leader can finish the raid without losing a weapon. Suddenly, he heard a desperate cry for help behind him. 3 of his partners fighting on the front lines became surrounded by the enemy. Trying to protect his sword comrades, the squad leader put up a shield in front of him. Shit! They're coming! How did you know there were only 50 spiders? There are at least several hundred of them. Who even went on a scouting mission? The swordsman, dazed with despair, noted that it would be difficult to cope with such an onslaught. The mage who had her back to him agreed, warning that she was running out of mana. Noticing the helplessness of his partners, the masked man could not decide for some time what to do in such a situation. Rushing out of his seat, he shouted to the helper to follow him to avoid being surrounded by the enemies coming up from behind. Chonson, however, calmly turned toward the spiders that were attacking from the rear, headed toward them, and asked the leader to help his comrades. He would finish up here and come back. When Tae-hoon heard this, he stopped abruptly and asked the boy what he was going to do. Without answering him, the guy continued to walk leisurely towards the furious monsters that had already pounced on him. Get down! The masked man shouted in panic, rushing to his aid. If he didn't use the key of the sword to its full potential, this kid would get hurt. But there was no way this worthless blade could withstand such a load. Meanwhile, Chanseong was no longer paying attention to the leader who was worrying about him. He simply stood in front of his enemies and closed his eyes, concentrating. At the same instant, the guy used the networld skill with which he had destroyed the crystal golem a year ago. A huge net of mana appeared in the space above the spider flying at him. A second later, the enemy found himself pierced through with a sword flying out of the net. Looking at this, the dumbfounded Yoon Tae-hyun couldn't immediately realize what had happened. Of all the weapons that Chonson could create right now, it would be the sword that would have the best quality. On one hand, it would be more efficient to create multiple swords and drop them all at once. But with the boy's current amount of mana, that's impossible. Well then, I can't think of anything better than this. When Chanseong put his hand forward, extending his index finger, the sword that had recently cut his opponent began to fly throughout the cave. Depending on where the young man pointed his finger, with the help of his incredible mana control skill, the blade flew in the direction he wanted. After trying out this way of controlling the weapon for a while, the guy finally realized that this was the best option to finish off all those nasty things. At this moment, he made a pattern in the air with the brush in his hand, and the blade tore towards the spider legion with lightning speed. Nothing could stop the sharpest blades of that flawless sword. In a few finger movements, Chonson chopped apart several dozen enemies. As soon as the spiders came within a few meters of the guy, they would immediately turn into mincemeat without even a chance to touch a scrap of his clothes. This is the perfect attack strategy for a D-ranked helper. The space around this guy and Tae-hyun literally became a meat grinder. When it was over, the masked man looked at Chonson dumbfounded. In the meantime, all of his opponents were already lying dead on the blood-damp ground in front of the helper. After finishing off the last spider, the flying sword nailed its corpse to the stone floor of the cave. Stunned at this terrifying sight, Yoon Tae-hyun can't understand how this guy was able to launch an attack on the area with just one weapon. In less than 10 seconds of combat, he had dealt with all those dozens of spiders. Used materialization in combat? No, first and foremost, it's a talented sapper who can fight. What are you doing? Didn't you want to go help them? Shin Changseong suddenly asked the masked man, pointing at the stranded comrades. After those words, Tae-hyun remembered it and glanced fearfully at his surrounded partners. Seeing that the 3 of them were still holding on, he realized that the situation was not good. We'll talk normally when this is over, said the guild leader, activating trespass. But before he ran off, Chonson stopped him, wanting to say something. He asked Tae-hyun to take care of all the dead bodies behind him. His teammates wouldn't believe that a helper had done it anyway. The puzzled man took off his mask and looked at the boy thoughtfully. All right, Yoon Tae-hyun said as he jumped up, preparing to burn all the enemies who had attacked his partners to the ground. After a while, all the spiders of the Legion lay burned on the ground. The teammates thanked the leader profusely for saving their lives. The shield maiden sitting on the stone floor noticed that he was a little surprised. He had thought at first that the masked man who had joined their group at the last moment looked familiar. But who would have thought that it would be the head of the Overkill Guild himself? Hyun apologized for not revealing his identity right away. The fact was that the man just wanted to quietly explore the dungeon. Standing still in front of him, the mage girl excitedly said that the master had nothing to apologize for. They had only survived because of him. It was so cool to watch Yoon Taehyun deal with all those spiders. The girl then decided to ask for a picture with the leader when they got out of here. "I'm back!" Suddenly came a voice interrupting the mage. Holding a lantern in his hand, the swordsman apologized for the delay, explaining that he and Chonson had started gathering side resources. He said that they had walked through the dungeon together, and it seemed that there really weren't any monsters left here anymore. However, another passageway has been discovered, and the lad thinks the squad could use to explore it. In turn, the shield maiden who had risen from the ground objected, saying that the group was unable to continue the sweep. He was sorry to do this, but the squad leader thought it was time for them to finish. Apologizing, the swordsman asked why he was doing this. After all, there wasn't much left. Then the man reminded him of something. The number of legion spiders they'd encountered, the geography of the dungeon. The report had been completely different. Dungeons exist beyond the gates, separate from our world. Dungeons are a place with strange creatures and geographical features not found on Earth. At this point, the concept of dungeons and awakened isn't fully defined. So for those who are brand new to Awakened, dungeon information is most important. Few Awakened can adapt to a dungeon if they have not encountered one before. And that means defeat, and at worst, death. That's how scouts came to be. These are the Awakened with the ability to detect or hide their tracks. Such people band together and start gathering intelligence on the dungeon. Often the rank of a dungeon will increase greatly after such exploration. This is why scouts are undeniably the main link to a successful dungeon sweep. Intelligence is usually over 98% accurate. It's unlikely that it's just a mistake. The possibility that this is also a dungeon with a ranking error cannot be ruled out. Despite this, the swordsman decided to remind the commander of something, seeing as they have the Overkill Guild leader with them right now. In that case, why don't the squad continue? Approaching him, the shield maiden said that he understood the eagerness of his comrades to continue the sweep. But the guild leader's help wasn't enough. If they weren't careful, everyone could be in danger. Meanwhile, the guy kept insisting, saying that he really wanted to clean up this dungeon and had personal reasons for doing so. The swordsman then asked if there was no other way. The pink-haired girl standing next to him immediately enthusiastically supported her partner. "What could be more important than life?" said the squad leader, glaring menacingly at them. "If they get into the room with the boss, there's no turning back." The man doesn't want to leave either, but he has to go out and report the situation first. "I agree with them." Yoon Taehyun's voice suddenly came. When Shieldbearer asked what he meant, the guild leader explained that even though he came here to explore everything, he was still a member of the team. If one could come to some conclusion about the origin of this dungeon through going through with the team, then he saw no reason to do so. "And if I want to explore everything, I need to get into the room with the boss," Dahyun added finally, noticing the gaze of the nearby helper. Realizing that he had been seen, Chonson immediately turned away. Meanwhile, the shield maiden bowed before the leader, and after thanking him, said that he trusted it to him from now on. But when the man decided to hand over the role of squad leader to Taehyun, the man interrupted him, telling him not to worry about it. The man in the cap allowed him to continue leading the team. The surprised shield bearer didn't object and informed his teammates that it was time to depart. "Follow me!" shouted the squad leader, turning around on his battle comrades. They wandered around the dungeon for some more time, but surprisingly, they were not attacked by any enemies. Eventually, a troop of hunters found themselves in front of a majestic gate. Standing in front of the doors, the commander takes a hint that they are most likely standing outside the room with the boss right now. So the man decides to hand out the last instructions before the battle. First, the boss of this dungeon is the Legion Spider Queen of rank D+. Her overall combat ability is quite low. She's considered a fairly simple boss, basically spawning Legion spiders. But that's just the initial information. They can't know what kind of creature is behind that huge door. "Let's go," the commander said briefly, opening the gate with both hands. When the doors opened, lone rays of light seeped inside the room. As they entered the cave, The hunting party looked around, but saw nothing special around them. Just a pile of rocks and cobwebs, just like before. Yoon Tae-hyun also doesn't sense any particular signs portending danger. In fact, that's the strangest part. He doesn't feel anything at all. Stand by! At the same moment, the shield maiden shouted, sitting down on his knee. This is the boss they've been waiting for! The swordsman standing behind him wondered if this was really the Spider Queen that the intel said it was. The mage, meanwhile, remarked that it was a good thing that no mistakes had been made with the boss. In that case, the pink-haired girl made the decision to attack first. Casting one of her most powerful electric spells, she immediately fired it at her opponent. All of the boss's henchmen were instantly incinerated by the high-voltage current. Great, this! The mage started to shout with happiness, but suddenly fell silent. Turning her attention to the enemy in front of her, the girl dumbfoundedly asked what had happened. The huge chopped-up body of the Legion Spider Queen lay in front of the hunting party. Frightened as he looked at this horrible sight, the shield maiden realized that this had never happened before. How could the boss be dead before they arrived? But just as he turned to his teammates, determined to warn them to keep their ears sharp, there was a loud rumble in the dungeon. A terrifying aura pierced every nerve in the body of all the squad members. It seemed as if they had never experienced such terror in their lives until that day. A monster several times the strength of the boss that the team had to fight, based on the intelligence they had been given, landed on the corpse of the Legion's long-dead Spider Queen. At the same instant, the piercing roar of the six-eyed creature sounded. Arana. Danger level, B+. A queen who controls all kinds of spider-type monsters. Possesses high intelligence and is very cunning. Does not give birth, but invades the territories of other spider-type monsters and increases her army at their expense. Can share power with minions. Glancing at the squad of people below, the monster grinned eerily, grinning its teeth. The hunters who see this terrible creature cannot even move from their seats from the fear that comes over them. While they were slowing down, trying to figure out what to do such a desperate situation, Arana had already struck with a sharp claw. Suddenly, a bright fire erupted. Running forward, Yoon Tae-hyun immediately repelled the enemy's attack with a single swing of his blade. Who would have thought that Arana, a B-rank monster, would show up? If you don't know how to handle the ball, you won't even leave a scratch on it. Therefore, the guild leader needs to deal as much damage as possible in one fell swoop. In the same second, he made an instant sword attack, attempting to cleave the belly of the enemy. However, unable to withstand such a colossal load, his sword immediately shattered into small pieces like plastic. Trying to dodge his opponent's retaliatory lunge, Daehyun realized that since the sword had broken, he wouldn't be able to deliver a fatal blow. But despite all of this man's skill, he would no longer be able to escape the monster's attack. He was too close to it, and there was no time to retreat. Suddenly, a sword materialized in space, stopping Arana's claw. Upon landing on the ground, Yoon Tae-hyun immediately realized who had created this. Stall for time while I create a new weapon for you, Shin Chong-seong said in a concentrated manner while extending his hand forward. Already a few seconds ago, the guy had started redirecting mana flows from his body to the palm of his left hand to craft a sword for the guild leader. But after a while, he tensed as he looked at his hand, realizing that he would not be able to create a weapon. Looks like the kid's used up all his mana, but be that as it may, it was still incredible that he was able to last that long with his amount of mana. And you can only drink mana potions once per day. If you drink more than that, you can get addicted. But the effects of these potions are incredible. At that moment, Daehyun realized that he couldn't dodge his opponent's attack and was too late to lunge. Suddenly, a sword materialized in space, stopping Arana's claw. Stall for time while I create a new weapon for you, Shin Chong-seong said in a concentrated manner while extending his hand forward. Arana is a B-rank boss. If not for a mistake, there should have only been a C-rank boss here called the Spider Queen. The troops were very lucky to have Yoon Tae-hyun with them. It would have been difficult for them to deal with Arana. Once the danger level exceeds B, the dungeon level itself changes. Meanwhile, Chonsun had already created a sword for the guild leader, and the latter immediately rushed into battle, fending off the enemy's attacks and trying to find a way to counterattack. In turn, the monster didn't stop attacking the man with its sharp claws, not giving Taehyun a break. With such a fine sword, the guild leader had no trouble blocking the enemy's strikes. But under such circumstances, he could not have a single chance to retaliate. After all, the enemy is not that weak. The net combat power exceeds 5 A-rank fighters. As for Arana's ability, you can't rely on Yoon Tae-hyun alone. Get up, Chonsun said, looking at one of his teammates trying to defeat the monster single-handedly. Guy asked his partners to be ready to fight. Arana changed the target. With a surprised look at the boy, the team commander asked who he was. Why would such a talented awakened go as a helper? Plus, he came with the head of the Overkill guild. Turning around to his teammates, Shin Chongseong said that there was no time to think about it now. First, the partners have some things to deal with. The guy immediately extended his arm, beginning to manipulate the mana overflowing his body to create each of his comrades in arms. Choose! Chanson spoke, materializing a sturdy blade in the space in front of the swordsman. Will you take the weapons in front of you and mop up the dungeon by fighting the spiders? Or are you going to run away and wait outside until it's resolved? I'm sure you'll make the right choice. After a while, grabbing their weapons in their hands, the squad members began to chop down their opponents one by one. Even though the spiders were attacking him from all sides, the man with the sword easily cut down anyone who came within 2 meters of him. It's just unbelievable. He'd never felt anything like it. This guy is holding such a magnificent weapon for the first time. It feels like he's cutting paper, not living flesh. Is killing monsters really that easy? In that instant, a bright blue light appeared behind the swordsman. The mage standing behind the shield mage used the staff Chanson had created to full power. Raising the magic tool above her head, the girl cast her strongest spell. In the same second, all the spiders surrounding them were vaporized by the high-voltage current. Only the weapons apologized, but the power of the skills increased several times. Did this helper really manage to create such a good weapon? Who the hell is this guy? The monster's green blood drips off the blade of the katana. Trying to catch his breath, Yun Tai-hyun stepped a short distance away and tensely looked at his opponent, which is what you'd expect from a B-rank boss. Against such a monster, it's hard to even buy time. Not wanting to give the guild leader time to pause, the wounded opponent immediately snapped out of his seat and pounced on the man. We need to get this over with as soon as possible, thought the dodged Dae-hyun, then activated the encroachment. Seeing the sword blade shrouded in bright flames, the monster looked at the man in horror. This man is incredibly fast, and with those wounds, there's no way Arana would have time to dodge. Tai-hyun ran up to the enemy, and with a single swing of his sword, gave the monster a mortal wound. The enemy fell to the ground dead, followed by the smell of burning flesh in the air. Looking at the bloody blade in his hand, the guild leader noticed that the weapon was still intact. It was much better than he had imagined. But while the man was thinking about it, several spiders ran up to him from behind. The teammates standing nearby can't figure out where such a huge horde of spiders came from. And where are they going? They're going to the head of the guild! Everyone back! The squad leader shouted as he realized what was going on. Meanwhile, looking at this strange phenomenon, Tai-hyun had gotten the idea that Arana had hidden these spiders intentionally. The situation is getting complicated. The boss activated his main ability. Arana sacrificed the spiders to restore her health. A cloud of large spiders surrounded the dead boss, whereupon he opened his eyes and smiled eerily. The monster immediately recovered and jumped to its feet, preparing to attack the guild leader. It can only mean one thing. Until the team kills all the spiders, Arana will come back to life again and again. In that case, Tai-hyun needs to increase his firepower to finish it all off in one fell swoop. But the moment the man activated encroachment to its ultimate power, the katana blade cracked. And you're better than I imagined. Shin Jung-seong, who was standing nearby, said with a smile. The guy explained that although he had created this weapon from leftover mana, he hadn't expected the guild leader to be able to destroy the sword he had created. Immediately after those words, the boy materialized a new weapon and thrust it in next to Tai-hyun. The helper asked the man to take this long sword. Chanson then clarified that it wasn't a one-handed sword. But unlike the ones the guild leader used before, this blade is much sturdier. It's the best weapon a guy can create at the moment, and Dae-hyun felt it as soon as he grabbed the hilt of his sword. With this weapon, he can defeat them all in one blow. The guild leader picked up his sword and immediately activated the encroachment at full power. The ground where the blade was stuck into immediately became covered with cracks, and lava began to seep out from there. I'm not very familiar with two-handed swords, but this seems to fit, Yun Tai-hyun said with a satisfied smile. As the man pulled the weapon from the ground and slid it behind his back, the blade immediately flashed and there was a loud fire explosion. The guild leader, embraced by his flames, shifted his weight forward, holding the heavy sword firmly in both hands. Jumping out, he pounced on the monster in front of him, preparing to sizzle it and the rest of the spiders in one swift movement. As soon as Dae-hyun approached Arana, his opponent's body literally began to melt from the temperature exceeding all limits. In the next second, a blade of flame pierced the body of the huge monster, subsequently slicing it in half and incinerating all the minions. Blast, it's a basic berserk skill. This is probably the first time Yoon Tae-hyun actually uses it correctly. Instead of gaining staggering power, this skill loses its rationality, because it's very difficult to deal with risk, which will follow when the weapon is blown to bits. Such power of Hellfire was beyond the power of even the strongest of A-rank hunters to contain. This incredible power was starting to drive Daehyun crazy. His glowing eyes were bloodshot, and his breath was so hot that it was melting his lungs. At the same instant, a powerful, fiery explosion occurred, the epicenter and source of which was the Overkill Guild leader who had released his overflowing power. Soon the rumble of the explosion died down, and the man's clothes were covered in a slowly fading fire. The blade of the bloody two-handed sword began to cool down little by little. It was dangerous. If Daehyun didn't let out all his strength, one could question his sanity. With a trembling hand holding the sword by the hilt, the man realized that this was only the second time this had happened since his awakening. He was finally able to use the skill normally. Turning around to the guy standing behind him, the guild leader realized that he was badly mistaken. Shin Jung-seong is no ordinary awakened person. When his ability is discovered, the whole world will focus on him. Now Daehyun realized why this boy was hiding his powers. A huge boss chopped in two lies on the stone floor of the dungeon. As he approached the still cold body, Chonsun looked at it thoughtfully. This remains emanates an incredible amount of mana. It can't even be compared to other bug dungeon bosses. Without taking his eyes off the dead monster, he called out to the guild leader behind him. The boy turned on him and wondered if the man felt anything from the corpse. Yoon Tae-hyun replied confidently that nothing came from the corpse and that Arana was definitely dead. He had gotten rid of all her minions, so she wouldn't come back to life. All right, Shin Chong-seong said as he approached the monster's remains. It seems that even a high-ranked hunter can't sense this mana. As soon as the guy was at the mana-infested corpse, the system alerted him that the passive skill Mana Absorption had been activated. The tremendous energy from the dead Arana immediately began to flow from the burned remains into the boy's body. The system window that flashed in front of his face showed Chonsun that his mana accumulation had reached its limit. For completing the task, the guy got a new skill, Demonic Weapon Production. Active skill. Production of demonic weapons. Using 100 units of accumulated mana, the wielder can create a weapon from the world of demons. Accumulated mana, 150. Saved number of demonic weapons, 0. Demonic weapons are saved when created and can be materialized without additional mana usage. Can be used once per day. The weapons of the demon world. Shin Jung-seong can't even imagine what kind of weapon it would be. He doesn't remember any descriptions of the demon world, but people know about it from somewhere. Too bad the reward has nothing to do with mana, but that's okay too. In addition, the mana accumulation of the passive skill continued. Thanks to Arana, Shin Jung-seong has already received half of the required amount. And it seems the rewards don't end there. Meanwhile, the guy was called out by Yoon Tae-hyun, standing behind him in bloody clothes. As he approached him, the guild leader held out his hand to the boy and explained that he had something to say. When Chonsun decided to ask him what was wrong, the man interrupted his partner and explained that he wanted to apologize. Despite your refusal, I still continue to ask you to join the guild. It was impolite even though I'm the guild leader, Tae-hyun said, bowing, surprising the guy by saying that. The man then repeated that he wanted to apologize for that very thing, and he was really sorry. Looking at his teammate with a puzzled look, Shin Chong-seong wondered why he had suddenly decided to apologize. At that moment, the squad leader approached the two men from the side. Dazedly looking at them, the man in heavy armor couldn't believe his eyes. What does this mean? Yoon Tae-hyun, the head of the Overkill Guild, is bowing down to a D-ranked helper? No. Judging from this guy's abilities, he's no ordinary person. He must be the hidden talent of the Overkill Guild. Ah, that was quite dangerous. A voice of relief was heard behind the dumbfounded group commander's back. Waving to the leader, the joyful swordsman said that he and the mage had searched the dungeon and that there was nothing else in it. The girl with the staff said that Arana had probably absorbed all the monsters in the dungeon. Then, as the sword from his hand began to disappear, the young hunter praised this marvelous weapon. You can chop monsters with it and not waste any energy at all. Deciding to look at Chonsun, the mage agreed with her partner, adding that she had never heard of a weaponsmith who could do something like this. Could it be that he was from the Overkill Guild? In turn, the abruptly snapping shield maiden blocked his comrade's view, and smiling awkwardly, suggested they go and contact the association for the time being. With a disgruntled look at him, the swordsman apologized and asked why exactly they should be on their way already. The girl objected as well, remarking that she wanted to stay and thank the guild leader with the helper. "Let's get out of this disgusting place as soon as possible!" The squad leader patted his comrades on the backs, not wanting to hear their objections. Not knowing what had gotten into him, the young swordsman finally agreed and asked the man to stop pushing them. As he walked towards the exit, Shieldmaker continued to block his partner's view. Even though this helper's connection to the Overkill guild was obvious, it was better to get out of here quickly. If they interfered in the guild's affairs, it would be a hassle. No matter what kind of emergency it was, no one would reveal such power so easily without a reason. It wasn't like the big guilds that emphasized security. Sighing, Shin Jungseong accepted Taehyun's apology and suggested that they talk normally first. The guy pointed out that even though he was using a fee, the guild leader shouldn't bow down to an unknown person. "Shin Chongseong, the guild doesn't bother you anymore. And of course, neither am I," Yoon Taehyun said, while straightening his back. He then extended his hand to the boy and added that this statement did not mean that the guild had given up. "This is my first opportunity. Let's make a pact," the man said, looking at Chanseong. Taehyun is sure that the conditions will definitely please this guy. The next day, Overkill Guild headquarters. "Nice to meet you again," the red-haired girl said, taking a seat on the couch across from Chonson. Min Hisu immediately introduced herself as the secretary of the Overkill Guild head. Today, she is also the person in charge of the contract. After greeting the woman, the guy narrated that the guild leader said he would contact him immediately. But who would have thought it would be the very next morning? The girl explained that the leader had asked them to prepare everything as soon as possible. Then the boy asked where they were now. It seemed that they had gone far enough. Haisu explained that it was a special reception area in the Overkill Guild. It's a particularly high-security location, and so you don't have to worry about privacy. Holding out some document to Jungseong, the girl asked him to read it. It was a contract on the terms that the guild leader had spoken to the boy in the dungeon. It would take time, but the boy could change the content of the contract if he didn't like it. In any case, the woman asked him not to be shy and to speak up if he was confused. Looking at the terms of the contract, Shin Chongseong smiled contentedly. "It's just like what Yoon Taehyun said in the dungeon here. Now that everything is organized, it feels more real. No questions, let's get on with it," the guy said, putting the contract on the table and moving it toward the girl. The day before, the still uncooled remains of the dead monster lay on the stone floor of the dungeon. "Support?" A perplexed Shin Chongseong interjected, looking at the guild head. The man confirmed it, explaining that it was unofficial support to be precise. Of course, it's speculation, but Taehyung vaguely understands why the guy doesn't want to join the guild. By the sheer number of reasons, the boy needs to hide his identity. If the guild leader is right, his suggestions might help. He can secretly supply the guy with the materials he needs. Equipment, ingredients, gate rights, it doesn't matter. A contract has to be signed as a formality. Everything will be delivered in secret, of course. Then, looking puzzled at his interlocutor, Chonson inquired why such kindness. Dae-hyun, however, replied that of course it wasn't for nothing. The guy will have to fulfill the tasks given to him personally. That's the condition of the guild head. The man then added that he wouldn't force the boy. If he didn't like the tasks, he could simply refuse. Hearing this, Shin Chongseong smirked slyly and asked what would happen if he didn't help, but decided to only receive support. That's not bad either. The point of the contract is primarily to create a bond between the Overkill Guild and you, and to prevent you from joining other guilds. Accepting support is nothing more than a sign of your loyalty, Yoon Tae-hyun explained, hoping to get this guy interested. But when they decided to end their conversation, there were footsteps nearby. Two men from the Hunters Association's scout troop ran up to them. The worried-looking man with glasses, standing behind his partner, asked the guild leader if he was okay. "I have to go now. I'll listen to your answer outside," Yoon Tae-hyun said, heading towards the exit. "I hope the answer is yes. Hey, if I've burdened you, don't answer. To me, your ability is better than all of that." And now Shin Jungseong is sitting in the reception room again, clicking his pen. According to his plan, the guy wanted to make a lasting impression on Yoon Tae-hyun and continue his relationship with the Overkill Guild without joining. Whatever the case, it's still a good thing for the boy. After signing the contract, Chonson slid it across the table to the girl and asked when he could start receiving support. Right from now on. Let me know if you need anything, Minhisu muttered, pulling something out of her purse. Putting some kind of box in front of him, the girl explained that the guild leader had prepared a gift for the guy to remember the conclusion of the treaty. The boy took the case in his hand, and the woman added that Yun Tai-young had found something useful in Archana's room. Opening this box, Chonson saw a large purple crystal inside. The boy held the lid in his hand for a while longer and stared mesmerized at the glowing object. Putting the case in his briefcase, the boy thanked Hisa. He then took out of his bag a list of the materials he needed at the moment and held that out to the girl. While the secretary scrutinized the list, the helper inquired when he would be able to get these materials. Taking a glance at it, the woman notes that there are quite a few positions, and so it will most likely be possible in a week's time. However, though she feels like she's prying, the red-haired girl doesn't think these materials will be useful to Chonson. In turn, the guy put his backpack behind his back and explained that he wasn't going to use it. Just want to give it to someone else, Shin Chongseong added, looking at the guild head's secretary. Same day, a few hours later, the headquarters of the Hunters Association. In the hallway of the building, the raucous conversations of employees and regular visitors can be heard. Holding the phone in his hand, a pensive Chonson looked at his watch. By his calculations, the man he was here waiting for should have arrived by now. At the same moment, the guy noticed a golden-haired girl not far from him. She really came. This shy blonde-haired woman's name is Han Chia, and she is an A-rank hunter. Despite her seemingly innocuous appearance, this girl will become just a fine fighter in the future. Her ranged attacks are superior to most hunters of even the highest rank. In Jongseong's past life, Han Chia was a storm of monsters. She could turn her opponents to ash with a single shot from her bow, or at the very least, leave huge holes in their bodies. Of course, such strength did not pass the eyes of the Hunters Association. And after the players were chosen by the system, this brilliant huntress became known as the Goddess Archer. Considering all the factors listed earlier and the undeniable beauty of this woman, she is the best option for Chonson right now. And so Han Chia came to the main headquarters of the Hunters Association. Upon entering the building, she went straight to the front desk. Approaching the staff at the front desk, she apologized and addressed them. Awkwardly averting her gaze, the girl requested a training pass to the gate. She then took her business card out of her pocket and placed it on the table in front of the employees. Taking Han Chia's business card in surprise, the dark-haired woman asked the visitor if she was an A-rank hunter. She then offered to allocate her a C-rank gate. However, Han Chia, once again awkwardly averting her gaze, replied that what she really wanted was a D-rank gate. Such a statement greatly surprised the staff. What do you mean by D-rank? This girl has been categorized as an A-rank hunter not too long ago, and yet she has almost no experience. She's only been to the gate a couple times. This precedent is extremely surprising. The public knows of cases where lower-ranked awakened ones have quit their jobs. However, this has never happened to A-rank hunters. But with this kind of approach, Han Chia would most likely not be able to stay a hunter for long. It's possible that she'll be demoted very soon. The first rank of awakened was based on an unconditional amount of mana. As the blue energy poured through the rifts, mana flowed into all the people. But each person had a different amount of mana. The more mana your body can store, the better abilities you can have. So the association started to figure out how much mana someone had. Those who were able to absorb more than a certain amount were called awakened. And then they began to be divided into ranks depending on the amount of mana. Of course, the rank is not fixed. Even if the rank is low, you can raid dungeons, and if you become famous in the association, you can be promoted. Of course, the opposite happens. That's probably what's going to happen to this girl. As Han Chia filled out the form and handed it to a member of the Hunters Association staff, the dark-haired woman behind the reception desk decided to help her with the application and asked if she had a partner. After hearing a negative answer, the employee put Han Chia on the list of people looking for partners. The rules were to go on raids in groups of 2 or more. So far, there have been no requests for D-rank gates, so the girl will have to wait a bit. Not satisfied with this answer, Han Chia asked if it was definitely impossible to go on the raid alone. The employee, in turn, told me that this is possible only with a special permit for single entry. However, given that the girl is registering here, she does not have this permission. After explaining this, the dark-haired woman suggested that the visitor undergo a special test to get this permission. Then Chia waved her off and asked her to wait for a while. "Ah, Chia, I have something to tell you." the association officer suddenly said seriously, looking at the visitor. In a month's time, the Hunters Association will have a rank update. A message has already been sent out to all hunters about what they need to do to confirm rank. In particular, Han Chia, in order to confirm his A rank, either needs to have experience in dungeons of rank C and above or pass the A rank test. And by the looks of it, the girl is more likely to get a trial. She'll probably get a message about the trial and its details soon. All this conversation was listened to by Chonson, standing nearby. It's hard to request even a training gate right now. Han Chia needed to make a request online. Coming to such a crowded place was just crazy for her. She decided to come in here because she thought she wouldn't be downgraded. Either way, she needs to gather her thoughts and pull herself together. The gate the girl is about to go to is only D-ranked. That's why what happened last time won't happen again. At the same moment, while thinking about all this, Han Chia was surprised to notice a new message sent to her phone. It's very strange. The reception told her that she would have to wait, but the invitation had arrived. The dungeon was indeed rank D as expected. No matter what, Han Chia was going to go alone anyway, so she should rather agree. A few hours later, a gateway to a D-rank dungeon somewhere in the center of the city. Han Chia, dressed in her work clothes and taking her bow with her, approached the guards standing at this gate. "You're Hunter Chia, right?" Suddenly heard an unfamiliar voice from behind. When she turned around, she saw a guy. He immediately introduced himself as Shin Seong and said that he was a support person. Han Chia then approached him and bowing introduced herself. Apologizing for being late, Chonson offered to start their raid. The girl immediately agreed and started discussing the permission to enter with one of the guards. Han Chia, a ranger class hunter who was originally given an A rank. But after repeatedly failing tests, she became one of those who were downgraded to C rank. Under such circumstances, this girl was given the title of an archer goddess because she had discovered a special talent after becoming a player. And thankfully, Shin Seong knows which one. It was a talent you can bring out in yourself, even if you're not a player. And the guy's goal today is to awaken that talent in Han Chia. Soon, when all the nuances were resolved, the two were given permission to enter the gate. This time, the appearance of the dungeon was very different from the previous times. The terrain was like a mountainous area overgrown with dense trees. And then, somewhere in the forest, a monster's growl was heard. Goblins armed with axes and bows walked through the forest. Han Chia was watching them from behind the bushes, pondering a plan of action. Finally, she waited for the goblins to leave. Looking at her wrist, the girl wondered what she should do about these monsters. She was extremely lucky that she decided to buy herself a special gear that sensed the man of monsters. However, Han Chia still had no idea how she should work as a team. After realizing this, she turned around to Seong and addressed him. The girl apologized to the guy and told him that she was going to go here alone. Then she asked if it would be okay if she killed everyone alone. And when Han Chia promised her partner to give him the whole bow and make up for everything, the boy agreed and asked her not to worry about it. "If you need any help, let me know. I can at least create arrows," Chonson added, looking at the girl. Thanking the guy, Chia took the bow in her hand and rose to her feet. Taking an arrow out of her quiver, she drew the bowstring and aimed it at one of her opponents. Looking at the back of one of the monsters, the girl began trying to calm herself and concentrate. In the next second, she released an arrow from her bow, causing a powerful energy beam to form. In an instant, it reached the unsuspecting target. The energy beam, after blowing half of the goblin's head apart, flew further away. Unfortunately, the arrow didn't hit anyone else and flew past the remaining opponents. When the energy beam hit the tree, there was a massive explosion. The goblins immediately turned around and attacked the girl. Han Chia in turn had already managed to fire a second shot from her bow. However, the arrow flew past without hitting a single enemy. Watching all of this was Shin Seong sitting on the sidelines. He had never seen Han Chia fight before he became a player. Her net destructive power is much higher than an A-rank hunter, but it's completely pointless if she doesn't know how to aim. As Chia took the fourth arrow out of the quiver, she noticed that she had managed to set a personal record. This time she managed to hit the target with one of the 3 arrows. If this continued, she would be able to kill at least 4 more opponents. Putting an arrow into the bow and pulling the bowstring, the girl decided to finish things off with 2 shots. But at that moment, she noticed something terrifying. One of the goblins took out a horn from somewhere and began blowing into it. The girl immediately realized why this monster needed a horn. Within seconds, crowds of goblins began to gather around Chia and Chonson. After looking around, Han Chia continued to keep the bowstring taut, unsure of what she should do next. At the same time, the special monster detection device began to emit loud sounds, announcing a huge gathering of enemies. That's right, the goblins surrounded the girl in a matter of seconds. At the same time, their numbers exceeded several dozen. Continuing to look around in panic, Hania tried to figure out where she should shoot. Forward or backwards? What should she do? And while the girl was thinking, several monsters had already pounced on her from behind, preparing to tear her to pieces. At the same instant, there was a blinding blue flash that covered the entire battlefield. Dozens of tall mana swords formed around Hania, thrusting their blades into the ground. Chia, I need your help, Chongsun said, coming up behind the girl. Looking at him in surprise, Han Chia asked the guy how such a thing was possible. He had said that he was a D-rank creator. In response, the boy said that he wasn't lying and was indeed a D-rank creator. So these swords won't last long. That's why he needs his partner's help. When the flustered girl asked what she should do, Chonson pointed a finger somewhere. Pointing at the monsters lurking in the bushes, the guy asked his partner to shoot them using all his remaining strength. Still not understanding what this boy was up to, Chia didn't contradict him and agreed to take his advice. She immediately took aim at the monsters sitting in the bushes, and using the full power of her skill, she shot them with her bow, turning everything in the arrow's path into ash. Lowering her bow, the girl asked Chonson what they should do next. Then the boy ran up to her and grabbed her arm. Are you asking what we should do next? You've cleared the way with your shot, so now we must run. The boy replied, dumbfounding his partner. After saying that, the two of them immediately started running away from the monsters chasing them. Soon, after only a few minutes, Chia and her partner stopped for a little break. They found themselves at a high rocky eminence, in which they could see a passage into a cave. While Chonson thoughtfully shined his flashlight inside the cave, the girl standing next to him tried to believe that they had managed to survive. However, she has no idea where the two of them ran off to. Did they really manage to break away from such a huge horde of goblins so easily? No, they didn't come off. That's not what it looked like. The monsters stopped themselves, as if afraid of something. They just couldn't chase their victims anymore. There's something obviously wrong here. So much has happened in such a short time that Han Chia can't even realize it. But why is Zhongxian so calm? We need to get out of here soon. After thinking it over, the girl turned to her partner and said that the raid should end for today. After that, she promised the guy to pay the compensation she had talked about earlier. You can't leave yet. The boy suddenly replied, looking at her. The thing is, the goblins are alarmed, so they will be around for a while. It is dangerous to leave now. Besides, it seems that Chia dropped a flare on the run. So the two of them have no choice but to wait for the goblins to leave. Hearing this, the girl asked Chonson when they would be able to leave here in that case. Turning back to her, the guy explained that it could take half a day, but possibly longer depending on the situation. This information made Han Chia shudder with fear. Half a day? The girl shrieked in panic, grabbing her head. And as she sat behind him, letting out her last breath, Chonson scratched the back of his head awkwardly, realizing he had to lie to her for her own good. In fact, all those goblins will be gone in about 30 minutes. Their concentration isn't that good. The reason is strained plausible, but at this point, Han Chia seems to believe anything. The thing is, Chonson led her to this cave for a reason. However, the hardest part for the guy will be getting this girl to go into that cave with him. Given how scared she is, it's unlikely she'll agree to it. And while Chonson was pondering this, his partner came up to him from behind and apologized. Bowing to him, Chia said that all of this happened because of her. If she knew how to fight, none of this would have happened. If she had originally gone alone, Chonson wouldn't be in this predicament. She has caused trouble again. Even in the D-rank dungeon, she's acting so cowardly. The girl realized that she shouldn't have come here. Now she is completely that she is useless and has no right to go on such raids. And at that moment, while Chia was mentally belittling herself, her partner extended his arm forward. If you're sorry, do one thing for me, and please pull yourself together. Shin Chongxiang suddenly said, snapping his fingers. When the guy turned around, the surprised girl asked what the request was about. The boy in turn looked back at her and offered to chat a bit and hunt an elite monster since they had tons of time. After a while, the two of them entered the cave and headed deeper into it. Lowering her gaze, Han Chia asked the guy if he really needed help. She then explained that she didn't have much experience in dungeons. This girl doesn't even understand what the boy means by elite monster. Then Chonson remembered that this was his partner's first time participating in a raid at the training gate. Now it was understandable why she wasn't aware of the elite monster. It wasn't very common information. Instead of the bosses in the regular dungeon, the training dungeon is inhabited by an elite monster a rank lower. And he dwells in this very cave. For personal reasons, Chan Seong needs to defeat this monster. However, until now, he's been denied and couldn't even fight him. So Chia is the first one to accept him, a sapperter, on the team. After hearing such a heartwarming story from her partner, the girl mentally remarked that it was rather odd. After thinking it over, she looked up and looked at the guy. After that, Han Chia abruptly stopped on the spot. "I'll help you if you don't mind." She spoke confidently, not taking her eyes off the boy. Helping him was the right decision. It was thanks to Zhongzeon that the girl managed to escape from those goblins. Plus, she knows how much it hurts when you don't make the team. But while Chia was mulling all this over, her monster detection device warned of danger. At the same instant, the loud footsteps of a huge creature were heard. The girl was immediately wary, and a completely calm Chonsun shined his flashlight on the monster that appeared in front of them. It was the same elite monster that Shin Chongsun had talked about recently. Seeing this huge creature, Han Chia stepped forward, and asking her partner to step back, took aim at the enemy with her bow. Even if this monster is an elite monster, it's still a D-rank monster. If a girl hits it even once, she will definitely kill it. Realizing this, Chia took aim at the enemy and immediately released an arrow. The powerful energy beam caught up with the elite monster in a second, which, at first glance, was not at all prepared for this attack. However, against all expectations, he put his club in front of him and easily blocked the arrow. Seeing this, Chia looked dumbfoundedly at her opponent. Had he really managed to repel her arrow? Still not understanding how this could have happened, the girl took aim at the monster again, deciding to shoot as hard as she could. But after a moment, she noticed that she couldn't let go of the bowstring. She just couldn't even move her arm out of fear. Why is this happening now? Why can't she get a shot off? Trying to realize this, Chia looked fearfully at the enemy standing in front of her. The elite monster in turn had already brought his club behind his back, preparing to strike. That's when Han Chia realized that this was most likely the end for her. But at that moment, someone came up behind her and grabbed her by the scruff of the neck and threw the girl back. Chia fell to the ground, and Chonsun, who had shoved her off, rushed towards the elite monster. In the same second, a horrible picture appeared before the blonde archer's eyes. The creature struck out with one swing of its club at the spot where Chonsun had just stood. Sitting on the cold ground, the girl couldn't believe it had happened. Everything happened just like the time Han Chia went to the dungeon with her past team. Then one of her partners started accusing Chia of not only not being a good shot, but also of shooting towards her comrades. But when Chia tried to justify herself, the woman gave her a disgusted look and told her not to think much of herself since she had an A rank. After that day, the blonde-haired archer tried to find a new team, but was turned down every time, even though she was an A rank hunter. She was nicknamed the unlucky A rank who almost killed her partners in the dungeon. Moreover, there were rumors about this girl about her weakness and worthlessness. It had gotten to the point where even D-rank teams were starting to reject her. No one could understand why Han Chia was still a hunter if she was so weak. She should have given it all up, because now Chonsun's dead because of her. The moment the girl sat doomedly on the ground, an elite monster had already approached her and raised a club above her head and prepared to smash her on the ground. Just as suddenly, from nowhere, a wriggling blue ray of mana appeared. "Acting is clearly not my thing," Chongsun muttered, not wanting to hold back his true power any longer. He released a sword of mana at his opponent, but the monster turned around and immediately blocked the blade flying at him, temporarily forgetting about his victim. The guy then held his hand out in front of him and shouted to his surprised partner to calm down and do what he was going to say next. The guy prepared something especially for her. An emergency would activate her special ability without a problem. All that's left is to buy time. After thinking about it, Chonsun started attacking the opponent and asked the girl to look more closely at the bastard. If she looked closely, she would definitely see a weak point. And when she succeeded, she would have to shoot there with all her might. And the boy's plan was really starting to work. Han Chia had a strange feeling. It was like his senses were heightened. It's very uncomfortable, but Chonsun was right. Chia saw what he was just talking about. Seeing clearly where she needed to aim, the girl picked up her bow from the ground and pulled an arrow from the quiver. After that, she drew the bowstring and a powerful aura enveloped her entire body. She'll only need one arrow. It only takes one arrow to end it all. Thinking about it, Han Chia charged her attack and concentrated as much as possible. In the next second, she fired a shot of energy that crushed everything in its path. Seeing the blob of deadly energy flying at him, the elite monster was unable to dodge this attack. Fortunately, it seems that Chanseong had correctly activated this girl's ability. For some reason, the activation conditions were very strict. However, no matter what, he succeeded, and the energy emanating from the arrow released by Han Chia shattered the elite monster's club into splinters. After flying through the enemy's weapon, the arrow pierced through his chest, instantly finishing off the monster. Hania will certainly become quite useful to Jongseon in the future. She's going to be just the perfect hunter. Even after the energy arrow made a huge hole in its chest, the monster was still on its feet for a while. He ended up dropping dead to the ground. For Hania, looking at this world without glasses is quite unfamiliar. On top of that, she felt as if all her senses were heightened. While the girl was trying to figure out how this could have happened, Chonsun approached her. Though the method is a bit dangerous to awaken you, Chia, you need to awaken your senses, muttered the boy, looking at his partner. Looking at him dumbfounded, the girl asked the boy who he was. Why did she feel like he had seen all this coming? And in what sense awaken? In response to all these questions, Shin Jongseong asked his partner to take her time, explaining that they still had plenty of time to talk things over. But Han Chia didn't like that answer. She demanded that the boy not change the subject and answer normally. Suddenly, she felt something strange. Her pupils blurred and she began to lose consciousness. Clutching her head, she tried to steady herself, but her efforts were futile. A few minutes later, still the same cave in the D-rank training dungeon, Shin Jongseong, sighing heavily, carries his passed-out partner on his back. That's when he realized how hard it was to make comrades. On the bright side, at least one issue is now resolved. After a while, the guy still carried Chia out of the cave, who was already awake a couple minutes later. The girl sat down on the ground and apologized to the boy. She told him she didn't know why she had acted that way. She felt as if it wasn't her at all. Han Chia can't believe she showed such disrespect to the man who saved her twice. The girl once again apologized to the surprised guy for being suspicious of him, and for suddenly fainting. Taken aback, Chonsun sighed and told his partner not to worry about it. No one was hurt, and all the monsters had already been defeated, and so Chia should pack up. Besides, it's already been half an hour. Reaching out to the girl, the boy asked her to hand over the pendant he had given her earlier before entering the cave. Chia immediately reached into her pocket, asking the guy to wait a bit. She then took out a gemstone pendant from her pocket and held it out to Chonsun. The color of this pendant has changed, and so it can be understood that this girl managed to use it. Meteor Perception is a rare item that can only be obtained in the A-ranked dungeon, Sanctuary of the Burning Harpy, Sharpened Senses item ability. This ability activates automatically when special conditions are met. The sense of the possessor is rarely heightened. At this time, a person's capabilities are greatly increased. With this amulet, you can use abstract feelings, but the problem lies in the challenging conditions. The wearer's emotions must be at their peak. For people like Han Chia, the best way to activate is through intense fear. That was why Shin Jongseong made her feel insanely scared. Even though it seemed difficult, he managed to awaken this girl. When the guy was trying to find this pendant, he noticed that this thing is not only very expensive, but plus it's also almost nowhere to be sold. So he gave up trying to buy Meteor Perception and asked Taehyung to find it. And the man had indeed found the pendant the boy needed in just 2 days. Thanks to him, things have gotten a lot easier. But this was just the beginning. Han Chia just felt awakened by the item. She needed more practice to reach her original level. Listen carefully, Chia. Your first priority is to make sure that your concentration is solely on the monsters, Chonsun muttered, looking at his partner. In order to do what Chonsun just said, the girl needs to change her bow first. She is strong enough, so she can change from a short bow to a long bow and shoot from afar. Naturally, Chia would be dealing with fewer monsters from now on, and thus would obviously be less likely to be frightened by them. After hearing all of this, the blonde archer looked at the guy mesmerized. "Thank you, Chonsun," she said suddenly, surprising the boy. Not understanding what she meant, the guy asked the girl what she thanked him for. Han Chia in turn replied that she was grateful to Jongseon for the pendant. After all, when she thought she was dying and helpless, she felt something from this object. It was like everything around her was frozen, like she could do anything. This girl suddenly saw the place she needed to aim for. The target was right on the monster. Awkwardly lowering her gaze, Chia admitted that although she was at rank A in terms of character and everything else, she was no higher than D. And in trying to change that, the frustration only grew. It felt like the girl had grown a lot in that short time of her acquaintance with Chonseong. She felt that she too was capable and could fight. It was at that moment that Chia first became passionate about her work. Realizing that she had gone too overboard with her monologue, the girl began apologizing to the boy. Then Chonsun remarked that it wouldn't be easy for Chia alone. He then said he would give her his number so she could call him if she needed anything. Hearing this, Chia looked at the guy admiringly and thanked him. At the same moment, Chonsun received a text message on her phone. Yoon Dae-hyun, who wrote to him, asked the guy to contact him since there was an emergency. Switching off phone, the boy decided to contact the head of the Overkill Guild when he came out of the dungeon. A few hours later, Hunters Association headquarters. Standing by the window, Yoon Tae-hyun is chatting with someone on the phone. Finishing the conversation, the man promised the interlocutor to call back after the meeting. In response, Chonsun promised the guild leader to help in any way he could. After all, the last time he'd given the boy something useful. With a relieved exhale, Tae-hyung was glad that this thing was useful to the guy. Thanking the boy for agreeing to help, the man bid him farewell and ended the call. Putting the phone in his pocket, he looked thoughtfully out the window. At that moment, there was a knock on the door. After that, the door opened and a man entered the room. "The president of the association is back. We can move out," Min Hee-soo, who had stepped inside, muttered. Soon, when Yoon Tae-hyun had gathered all the things he needed, the two left the room. Walking down the corridor, they simply remained silent, trying to mentally prepare themselves for the upcoming meeting. Then Hee-soo looked at the guild leader thoughtfully. Turning to him, the girl pointed out that this situation was quite unusual. Usually, an official document is sent. Who would have thought that the president of the association would personally summon Yoon Dae-hyun? He'd sent some pretty complicated errands through the documents. But if the president had summoned Tae-hyung in person, it could mean something more serious. The S-rank gate may have reappeared. After listening to his subordinate, Yoon Tae-hyun reassured her, reminding her that Jung Se-on had agreed to help with this. If the guild leader fights like before, there would be no danger. Contacting Chonsun was really the right decision. Looking at Dae-hyun, Hee-soo noticed that he seemed to be in better spirits than he had been after the Arana dungeon. It's probably because of that creator. Ever since that guy signed the contract, Tae-hyun has been acting weird. Unlimited support? Who would have thought that the guild leader would make such an amazing offer? Although he is a berserker, which makes it hard to control his emotions, the Overkill guild leader is more calculating and sensible than most. Is this Shin Jong-seong really more capable than he seems? No. Hee-soo is sure that there's no way the D rank can create a weapon that would please the guild head. Yoon Tae-hyun invites this guy quite rarely, and so Min Hee-soo decides to personally find out everything after the meeting. After a while, the two men arrived at the door of the right office, where a man in a suit was waiting for them. Seeing them, the guard greeted Yoon Tae-hyun and asked if he had come alone. Looking at the man in surprise, the Overkill guild leader asked who else should come. The guard then replied that he had been informed that 2 guild heads were supposed to come. In turn, Yoon Tae-hyun decided to inquire about the second guest guild leader. "There he is," the man in the suit remarked, pointing behind Tae-hyung's back. "Ah, are you Yoon Tae-hyun?" A familiar voice was suddenly heard. Hearing this, the Overkill guild leader turned around and tensely looked at the person standing behind him. Waving his hand at him, the purple-haired man remarked that the Overkill guild was rumored to be very active lately. This man is the second invited leader of the guild. The president of the Hunters Association decided to invite him on an equal footing with Yoon Tae-hyun. And as ironic as it is, but this man is the one person who can piss off the Overkill guild leader. And while Yoon Tae-hyun looked at him in disgust, the purple-haired man approached him with a mocking smirk. "Who do we have here? The head of the Over-Idiot Guild?" he said with a chuckle as he stood in front of Tae-hyung. That person who can hang Yoon Tae-hyun is named Kim Ah-hyuk. Moving even closer to Tae-hyun, Ichiok asked why his guild was so bad. After all, the members of the Overkill Guild are quite capable. So could it be because of their leader? In response, Yoon Tae-hyun pushed the purple-haired man away from him, explaining that he was too busy to respond to such absurd provocations. "Of course you must be busy picking out low-rank dungeons," Ichiok said mockingly, not wanting to stop pissing off his opponent. And when he asked Tae-hyung if he really wanted to be comforted by the newcomers in the low-ranking gate, Hee-soo asked the man what he meant. Kim Ah-hyuk then explained that although there were instances of dungeons with rank errors, it was likely that Dae-hyun had personally entered such a dungeon for the purpose of mopping it up rather than saving his subordinates. Taking the indignant Kim Hee-soo by the shoulder, the Overkill guild leader asked her not to respond to it and just ignore it. Then, turning to the guard standing behind him, he asked for the door to be opened for them. Without objecting, the man in the suit opened the door and looked inside. He immediately informed the president of the Hunters Association that the heads of the Overkill and Shinhwa guilds had arrived. In response, the man sitting at the table remarked that he could even hear the two men arguing there from here. That elderly man sitting in the chair is named Han Cholman, and he is the president of the Hunters Association. Noticing that nothing changed over the years, Cholman asked the guard to let the guild heads into the office. When the two men entered, the guard and Hisu remained waiting outside the door for the meeting to end. Just when he saw the guild leaders entering the office, the president of the association said that he had an urgent task for the Overkill and Shinwa guilds. 3 days ago, an undetermined gate appeared and disappeared on the outskirts of the city. Looking at him perplexed, Taehyung clarified if this was a gate with a mistake. Shaking his head, Cholman replied that it wasn't like that. Like he said earlier, this gate is indeterminate. It's difficult to even measure the mana level. Hearing this, even Kim I-hyuk couldn't contain his surprise. How is that possible? It's strange that this gate can't even be evaluated. Usually, the rank of a gate is determined by two things. First, a special tool is used to measure the amount of mana in the gate itself. So usually the rank of the gate is equal to the rank of the monsters behind it. Second, the intelligence sent by the Hunters Association is correlated. As we all know, dungeons with rank error appear when the amount of mana increases dramatically. But even this is different from a situation where measurements can't even be taken. The Hunters Association has tried several times to send scouts to this mysterious gate. However, no reconnaissance operation was successful. None of the scouts sent out returned. Hearing this information, Kim I-hyuk, who was sitting behind the chair, put his foot on his leg. What, you don't know the rank of the dungeon? You don't have any information, and yet you didn't inform me here? Aren't you trying to shift the blame? The purple-haired man indignantly inquired, glancing suspiciously at the association president. In response to that, Han Cholman explained that the Hunters Association didn't know how long the gate curtain of unknown rank would be maintained. So if it was left as it was, it wouldn't be surprising if monsters started coming out. It's happened before, and every time it's been hell. Anyway, Cholman knows that asking for help with this is impertinent, but as said, it's an emergency. No refusal is accepted this time. The president of the Hunters Association wants the Overkill and Shinhwa guilds to team up and mop up the uncertain gate. At first, he wanted to send the Hyunmu guild to the operation as well, but due to a sudden business trip overseas, they can't join. This is a serious enough case to summon the 3 largest guilds in the country. The deadline for preparation is 2 days, and Han Cholman himself will provide the funding and the best reward. Of course, if the guild heads need anything, the association will help in any way they can. After listening to the president, Yoon Tae-hyun lowered his gaze and thought. He then clarified whether the squad could include more than just guild members. To this, the president of the Hunters Association replied that it didn't matter. Since the existence of undefined enemies sows chaos and panic in the society, only a small number of reliable people are allowed. Such an answer clearly pleased Tae-hyung, causing him to smile imperceptibly. I see, the man said briefly, looking at Cholman contentedly. A few hours later, the main building of the Shinhwa Guild. Upon entering the building, Kim I-hyuk irritably took off his jacket and threw it behind his back. He immediately ordered his subordinates to create a team of guild members of rank A and above. Remembering that satisfied smile of Yoon Tae-hyun's, the purple-haired man realized that this bastard had an ace up his sleeve. It's incredibly infuriating to him. You can't let the Overkill Guild prove themselves. That's why I-hyuk decided to take the opportunity to stomp on Tae-hyun by including his trump card in the team. After looking at his subordinates, the man ordered that Kang Yuran be summoned to him. And when the staff tried to contradict him by explaining that Kang Yuran was not helping the Shinhwa Guild, I-hyuk ordered them to do their best, threatening to fire them, before irritably turning around and leaving. In fact, Kang Yuran is no longer helping anyone and is not cooperating with anyone right now. Therefore, Kim I-hyuk can take the opportunity to hire her. 2 days later, undetermined gate. The Overkill Guild with Yoon Tae-hyun at the helm arrived at the location first. Looking around irritated, the dark-haired girl asked why the hell the people of the Shinhwa Guild were late. Turning around on her, the large man with glasses reminded her that there were still 5 minutes left, and the Shinhwa guildmates always do that and arrive exactly on time. Sighing, Sun Jae-hee started twirling the gun in her hand and saying how much assholes like this pissed her off. They have absolutely no manners at all. Will they learn anything if I shoot them in the heads? The dark-haired girl said bloodthirstily, stopping the gun at her ear. As he approached her, the man with glasses pounded the girl in the head with his fist and asked her to watch her tongue. Catching her head, Ji-hee squatted down and took stock of the fact that the deputy guild leader was simply scatty strong. What, scot-free? The man in glasses angrily interjected, walking up to the girl. Looking at the two of them, Jongseon remarked that the Overkill Guild members are on great terms. Dae-hyun confirmed this, adding that despite their strange behavior, they are very reliable in battle. Then, looking at the guy, The man thanked him for agreeing. In response, Zhangxian explained that he couldn't have done anything differently. The boy simply had to thank Taihyung for providing him with that item. Of course, that's not the only reason. 5 days ago, a system window suddenly appeared in front of Zhangxian, stating that there was a hidden quest. It also said that a certain dungeon with a story had opened. Only a small number of players get this hidden assignment. Player selection hasn't started yet, but Chonson has already managed to get a hidden assignment, and so he sees no reason to turn it down. Although these dungeons have very high difficulty levels, if you clear them, you can get incredible rewards. Some even awakened new abilities in the player, but who would have thought it would be that dungeon? While the guy was pondering all of this, Yoon Taehyun approached him. The man decided to apologize to the boy in advance for the rudeness of the bastard who was about to come. After stopping fighting, Jae-hai and the deputy guild leader heard someone's footsteps. What? You're early. I'm sorry. We have a lot of work to do, you know. Kim Ah-hyuk's voice came out. As he got closer, he added that it looked like the Overkill Guild had tons of time on their hands since they had come here so early. Well, yeah, since they go on low-ranked gates, it's no wonder they have plenty of free time. Those words from Kim Ah-hyuk, the deputy guild leader, grabbed Jae-hee by the scruff of the neck and asked her to ignore the whole thing. And when the girl tried to object, the man with glasses firmly shut her mouth with his hand. The Overkill Guild and the Shinhwa Guild are still in a tight relationship. It's not only an emotional battle between the guilds, but also the media arguing over who is the strongest. Meanwhile, Lee-hyuk noticed something strange. Seeing the unfamiliar guy standing at the gate, the purple-haired man laughed and mockingly asked Taehyung if that was his trump card. Just recently, Yoon Taehyun acted like he had something incredible, and it ended up being just an ordinary squishy kid. Look at his clothes. Is he going on vacation? The dungeon sweep is a joke, you think? What? You want to be carried out of there on a shield? Hearing this irritated yell from Lee-hyuk, the Shinhwa Guild shieldmaster walked over to his leader and asked him to stop being angry. After all, the Shinhwa Guild also had a new member. At this point, the creepy woman standing behind the backs of her new companions reminded them that they didn't have much time to stand here and chat. Fixing her hair, she added that they didn't have time to argue, and so they should hurry up. Seeing Kong Yuran, a dumbfounded Jae-hai hid behind the deputy's back and asked in shock where this girl had come from. What kind of team lineup is this? The strongest elemental master in Korea who can use all 6 elements, Kong Yuran, S-rank warlock Kim Lee-hyuk, and on top of that, the guild leader of the Overkill Guild and the strongest berserker, Yoon Taehyun. Why did they put together such an all-star cast? Be that as it may, given all of that, Jae-hai realized that this assignment was going to be a simple one. However, Chonson disagrees with the girl's opinion. This mission won't be easy. In his past life, clearing this dungeon failed. Out of the 8 team members, only Yoon Taehyun survived the last round, and mostly due to his penetration skill. After Taehyun had cut the gate and gotten out, that dungeon suddenly disappeared. This was an unprecedented case of 7 high-ranked awakened ones being reported missing. The association worked hard to find something, but a dungeon existed with no information. There was no guarantee that the operation would succeed this time, and so, when the 2 guilds came together, they entered an uncertain gate. But against all of Chonson's expectations, what had begun to happen in this dungeon was unexplainable. In a matter of minutes, the squad traveled a great distance, easily crushing all the enemies in its path. Why is it so simple? A few minutes ago, just entering the dungeon with the squad, Jae-hai marveled at how cool everything looked. It was like an expensive estate. At the same moment, a strange sound was heard behind the backs of the people who had entered. The door they had just entered suddenly slammed shut, blocking the path to the gate. Running up to the door, the deputy guild leader grabbed the handles and tried to open it. When he realized that it was useless, he offered to break the door down by force. Then he, along with Jae-hai and the Shinhwa guild man, tried to break down the door at the same time. Noticing that they weren't getting anywhere, Ichiok demanded that they move away from the door and let him try to break it down. But at the same instant, he felt danger approaching behind him. While the man had his back to them, the opponents, who looked like human-sized dolls, pounced on him. Abruptly turning around, Ichiok smashed all the enemies attacking him with a single swing of his fist. To everyone's surprise, the opponents scattered from a single blow, making no resistance at all. As he approached his leader, the shield-bearer asked what was wrong with his skill. Ichiok replied that everything was fine, explaining that he had no need to use his skill for such trifles. But in the same second, the shield maiden noticed something unexpected and immediately alerted the leader to it. The monsters the man had just killed were revived. However, the monster's ability to revive only amused Ichiok. Such an ability he deemed worthy to see his skill. When the purple-haired man activated his skill, the puppets immediately pounced on him. In the same second, Ichiok slammed two fists into them. In one motion, he smeared the monsters on the ground. Jaehai and the deputy standing behind him immediately rushed into action, eager to help their ally. The other members of the squad decided to keep up with them and also began to fight the immortal enemies. Meanwhile, Jung Seon, who was standing to the side, asked Kong Yuran if she was going to fight. The girl in turn asked the guy the same thing. Then the boy replied that he was a support creator and had no need to fight. In that case, Kong Yuran explained that she didn't want to try for such a team. What actually interested her was that Korea's strongest awakened ones would be here. But on the face of it, these people are quite ordinary. I mean, they can't even kill one opponent. Undoubtedly, their strength is comparable to S-rank hunters. But why they are called the strongest, the girl can't understand. If she had known it would be like this, she would have refused to go in for this surgery. After listening to her, Jong Seong remarked that the fact that these monsters don't die is rather strange. The infected mana of these creatures is not in the usual form. Looking closely at his opponents, the guy noticed strands of infected mana tied to their hands. Raising his head, he decided to see what was controlling these puppets. All the strands of mana appeared to be connected to an object hanging high near the ceiling. Apparently, for these dolls to die, you just have to destroy the object. But Jongseon doesn't want to show his skills to everyone. But unfortunately, there's nothing to do. At the very least, the guy can use the payment skill. However, just as the boy decided to destroy that strange object with his powers, he noticed Kong Yuran standing next to him, using her skill to destroy an insect crawling by. With a puzzled look at the girl, Chonsun asked why she wouldn't shoot that thing if she had enough mana to use it on regular insects. Pointing her finger at a fly flying by, Kong Yuran decided to clarify something to the guy. She only kills who she wants to kill. After seeing the girl sizzle another fly, Jong Seong immediately realized that insects were her weakness. That didn't even need to be checked. As he began to stealthily create something behind his back, the boy remarked aloud that apparently Duran was afraid of insects. And when the girl objected and asked the boy to stop talking to her, Chonsun pointed his finger upward and decided to warn his partner about something. Hanging near that object controlling the dolls was a shield in the shape of a huge spider created by the guy. Of course, Duran herself didn't know where the shield came from. That was why, just upon seeing the spider, the irritated girl activated the fire element and attacked it. And the moment she fired a fire projectile at the enemy, the spider suddenly disappeared. The powerful flame attack vaporized the item controlling the immortal puppets in a matter of seconds. In the next instant, all monsters lost the connection of the infected mana to the source. Hearing a massive explosion behind him, Ichiok tried to figure out why this wench was using her skills while not fighting. But, to the man's surprise, the doll he had just hit shattered into pieces and never stood up again. Picking up a collapsed opponent from the floor, Ichiok perplexedly examined him, not understanding why they had all abruptly stopped moving. Clutching the dead doll's head in his hand, the purple-haired man realized that they were all dead thanks to the fact that he had finally managed to warm up. After all, a little thing is a little thing. Meanwhile, the infected mana of the broken item controlling the dolls recently began to evaporate. Approaching this item, Chonsun began to absorb the infected mana. This monster revival source was rather unremarkable to ordinary people. If the guy didn't see the infected mana, then he definitely wouldn't have found it. Was this really the reason why a sweep of an undefined dungeon failed in a past life? Taehyung walked over to his deputy and told him that all the enemies in this room had been dealt with. But since no one in the squad knew anything for sure, they had to search the entire first floor first. After listening to the leader, the deputy told the rest of the squad to follow him. When they all entered the next room, new opponents were already waiting for them there. Just seeing them, Ihyok pushed the deputy and shield maiden ahead of him once and shouted that he would be first. Sprawling around, the man slammed his elbow into one of the dolls, pushing it several meters away from him. Also entering the room, Chonsun spotted another source of infected mana and asked Jaehee to shoot there. With a couple pistol shots, the girl destroyed the mana-infested item. At the same moment, all the opponents died, leaving the squad members bewildered. Thus, the squad went through all the rooms and cleared the first floor quickly enough. Taehyun stopped and motioned for his teammates to go up to the floor above. Ihyuk in turn told him to stop acting like he was the leader. Hearing that, Taehyung didn't answer anything and just turned around. Climbing up the stairs, he called Jaehee and Myungan to follow him. Then, angry that Taehyung didn't bother to ignore him, Ihyuk decided to trample his pride. Suddenly, however, the man felt a sharp pain. Looking at his hand, he couldn't immediately realize what had happened. Had he overdone it? Deciding to forget about revenge for the time being, Ichok called his subordinates to follow him, and together they began to climb the stairs. But there was one person left who didn't follow everyone. Something was starting to bother Chauncey. Just recently, before deciding to go up the stairs, Taehyung looked into the last room and said there was nothing in it. But Jungseon has a bad feeling about it, and so he feels like it's still worth looking in there himself. Going to the door of the last room of the first floor, the boy opened it ajar. As he stepped inside, he saw something unusual. The entire room was filled with infected mana. Suddenly, as the boy entered this room, there were screams somewhere on the second floor. Upon reaching the top, the squad encountered strong resistance. Ichok has all his energy spent on defending himself, so he has no time at all to use the skill. The rest of the squad was in the same position. For the most part, they repelled enemy attacks without being able to go on the counterattack. The worst part is, they didn't even see who was attacking them. Their opponents turned out to be an invisible high-ranked monster. And when Taehyung asked his partners if everything was okay, Jae-hee confirmed it, then added that she couldn't find the guy who was with the guild leader. Tensely looking around, Taehyung realized that Jungseon was indeed missing. But where to? Meanwhile, Shin Chongseong himself was still sitting on the first floor, collecting infected mana. That's when he heard the screams on the second floor and the sounds of a fierce battle. But as the guy absorbed all the mana and decided to return to the battlefield, the floor of the room suddenly opened up. Seeing the stairs leading down, Chonson jumped back, not knowing what to expect. At the same moment, he saw the silhouette of some creature. Could it be the enemy? However, as soon as the guy thought about it, he saw something strange. A little girl came up the stairs to him, holding a doll in her hands. When Chonson wondered what such a small child was doing in the dungeon, the girl looked up at him and smiled. Looking admiringly at his brother, the child asked if he was a hunter. Turning around, the girl motioned for the boy to hurry up and follow her. After saying that, she immediately rushed back down the stairs. Seeing this, Chonson asked the stranger to wait a second and explain how she realized he was a hunter. She looked back at the boy and explained that she had heard about it from her sister downstairs. She told the child that a hunter had come here to rescue her and leave together. And apparently, since Chonson went here, he is the hunter who came to save this girl's little sister. After listening to the kid didn't realize who she was calling her sister. As the girl looked at the boy, she thought it was very strange. She was quite sure that Jongseong was the hunter her sister was talking about. Going downstairs with the boy, the child informed her sister that she had brought the hunter the girl had spoken of. Looking at the face of the strange girl sitting on the floor, Chonson realized that she had taken mental damage from something. "Pardon me, I was sent from the Hunters Association," uttered the boy, drawing the girl's attention to himself with such words. Abruptly jumping off the floor, the stranger excitedly asked the guy if he had really been sent here by the Hunters Association. Chonson confirmed this, after which he asked the girl to explain the whole situation to him, no matter how difficult it was for her. With a sigh of relief, the stranger fell to her knees and began to thank the boy. Then, opening her eyes sadly, she told what had happened. She was the 4th scout of this dungeon. After the past 4 scouts didn't return, she was ordered to investigate the inside of the dungeon and find them. However, as soon as the girl entered the dungeon, dolls started running at her from all corners. In a panic, she turned around and ran back. She tried to open the doors, but suddenly it closed and wouldn't open. It was a trap. The situation is exactly the same as what happened to Chonson a little earlier. Not getting any new information from this, the guy asked the girl if she knew what happened to the rest of the scouts. The girl in turn replied that she had met the other scouts and started calling their names to find a way out together. But something was wrong with them. These people were completely unconscious, and as if they were obeying someone. They suddenly tried to attack the girl, and so she ran away. Eventually, she met this child. The scout is still alive today only because of her. "Yes, sis has been playing with me a lot," joyfully added the child, looking at the two of them. Looking at the girl thoughtfully, Shin Chongseong asked what her name was. To this, the child replied that her name was Elizabeth, but she allowed the boy to call her simply Bet. "Okay, Bet, let's get out of here together as quickly as possible. It's very dangerous to stay here alone," Chonson suggested. Lowering her gaze, the girl asked the boy if what he just said was true. On the contrary, it seemed to her that it was much more dangerous outside than here. Meanwhile, the fierce battle on the second floor of the dungeon continued. During the battle, while repelling another attack, Yoon Tae-hyun noticed something unusual. The foot of his invisible opponent suddenly appeared. This means that the invisibility of their enemies slowly begins to subside. What are they? Are they humanoid monsters? Just as Tae-hyun thought about it, a familiar business card fell out of the pocket of one of his opponents. It's definitely a scout's ID card. The face on the business card matches the face on the personnel file of one of the missing scouts that Taehyung got from the president of the Hunters Association. Seeing the face of the enemy whose invisibility had completely dissipated, Jihai shouted to the guild leader that the ones they were currently fighting were the missing scouts. Also realizing this, Taehyung ordered his subordinates not to attack these people in any way. The invisibility skill cannot be used for several minutes after it is deactivated, and plus the wearer's mobility is greatly reduced. However, even so, the squad cannot attack their opponents at full strength, as they are missing scouts. While trying to figure out what they should do next, Taehyung suddenly heard a scream not far away from him. The angry Ichiok shouted that he was so excited, thinking that he was fighting against monsters who had perfectly mastered the invisibility skill. But it actually turned out to be just the damn scouts. All right, their speed has dropped a lot now, the man suddenly muttered, clenching his fist. Their mobility has dropped, so I'll finish them off with one punch. After shouting this, Ichiok brought his fist behind his back and prepared to deliver his most powerful punch to turn all opponents into powder. But at that moment, a gunshot was heard. A scratch appeared on Ichiok's face, from which blood immediately flowed. What the hell? The purple-haired man wailed in rage, glaring at one of his teammates. Aiming a gun at the head of the Shinhwa Guild, Jihai asked if he had lost his mind. Their opponents are not monsters, but people who need to be saved. They just need to be returned to their normal state. Then, an angry Ichiok asked the girl what the hell she was talking about. Now they have only two choices, kill or be killed. No matter what these bastards look like, they attacked Ichiok and therefore should die. And the gunman who just shot him is no exception. While guild leader Shinhwa was saying this, the opponents used the invisibility skill and began to disappear again. And while those puppets were attacking him, the enraged Ichiok, not blocking their attacks, promised Jihee that he would finish her off first if she stopped him one more time. You feckin' bastard! The girl shouted indignantly, glaring hatefully at the man. Not wanting to hear any more of this, Taehyung stopped the two men and asked Ahyuk to listen to him. But the purple-haired man, still oblivious to the shield maiden desperately trying to protect him, refused to listen to his opponent. Taehyun then explained that this was not a request, but a deal. If Ahyuk fulfills all the conditions and saves the lives of these scouts, Daehyun will give all the rewards for the raid and funding to the Shinhwa Guild. At that instant, one of the invisible opponents abruptly shortened the distance with the purple-haired man, preparing to attack him once again. Blocking the blow with his hand, Ichiok replied to Taehyun that this deal wouldn't last long. If the man notices the Overkill Guild leader trying to trick him, he will immediately kill everyone here. Realizing that he had managed to buy some time, Taehyung thanked his partner for understanding. At this moment, Jihai approached the guild leader in a trembling voice. With a guilty look at him, the girl asked for a farewell for what she had done. In response, Taehyung asked her to focus on the battle and promised to deal with it a little later. The initial task now is to find a way to keep these people alive and get out of here alive ourselves. Has everyone seen what these dolls look like? Among them, there are some really very scary and unusual ones. Bet doesn't know exactly how, but all of these dolls are bound from purple binds. They won't die if they try to break those bonds by just attacking. These yarns are really very strong and therefore quite difficult to cut. After listening to Elizabeth, Chonson asked if the dolls could be returned to their normal state. He would like to bring back his colleagues who had been turned into dolls. In turn, Bet said that she had heard of a method. You have to stop the device, which is attached to the doll's body, when one of the threads was broken. But if you try to get rid of the thread with too strong a force, the body will collapse. Looking at the guy, the girl asked what he thought about it. Did this information help him? Even though the issue is still quite difficult, this girl still did a good job of helping Chonson with the problem, and so he decided to ask her one last question. Meanwhile, in the midst of the battle, Ichiok shouted that he would finish them off in 20 seconds after the opponents lost their invisibility. The battle had hardened too much and it was impossible to continue like this, and so this was the only option. Trying to find another way out of this situation, Jihai asked Kang Jiran to help them in the battle by starting to block the opponent's movement with ice or something else. Looking back at her, Jiran asked the girl not to cross the line. This situation is pissing her off and she is already trying her best. 10! Ahyuk's voice suddenly sounded. 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. After shouting out the last digits, the purple-haired man activated his skill and brought his fist behind his back. as suddenly he felt the same sensation he had gotten then on the stairs. Only this time it was much stronger. Ichok's skills suddenly stopped working for him. You stopped his ability in perfect timing. Shin Chongseong's voice suddenly came through. We were almost unable to save them. You can rest now, Betty. Leave it to me from here on.
Pet the cat.